has joined us, so we have a quorum. So we'll commence the meeting. We are in public session. The meeting is now in public session. Before we begin, can I remind members, witnesses and members of the public gallery to turn off their mobile phones. The purpose of today's meeting is to undertake an examination of the Pre-Agriculture and Fisheries Council and Fish Quotas decommissioning. For the first session, the committee will hear from Mr. Charlie McConnell, OTD, Minister for Agriculture, Food and Marine. After the second session, the committee will hear from representatives of the fishing industry. And the Minister hasn't arrived yet, so I suppose we better wait for him to give his opening statement. So we'll wait for the Minister. We're asked to exercise personal responsibility to protect yourself and others on risk of contacting COVID-19. Privilege. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege and respected evidence to give to a committee. This means that witnesses have full defence and information action planning said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and remind the long-standing parliamentary practice the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse comment should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who give evidence on location outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as a witness giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice on this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to publication by you outside the proceedings held by the committee of any matters or writings from the proceedings. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the houses or an official, either by name or such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Parliamentary privilege is considered to apply to persons or members participating online in the committee meeting when the participation from within the parliamentary precincts. There can be no assurance related to participation online from outside the parliamentary precincts, and members should be mindful of this when they are contributing. Pre-Agriculture and Fisheries Council's first session, the committee will hear from Minister Charlie McConnell, OTD, for Agriculture, Food and Marine. And now I'll ask the Minister to make his opening statement.
Thanks, Ciarán, and thanks for the opportunity to outline my main issues of concern ahead of the December Fisheries Council this coming weekend. As you will recall, in order to examine the implications for Ireland of quota setting proposals for 2023, a sustainability impact assessment was carried out and brought before this committee on the 25th of October past. That sustainability impact assessment draws its conclusions from a public consultation process with all major stakeholders, including industry representatives and environmental NGOs, and also expert contributions from the Marine Institute and Bord Iascaigh Mhara. And I'm joined here today by Dominic Rehan from Bord Iascaigh Mhara, Ciarán Kelly from the Marine Institute, and from my own team, Cecil Beamish and Josephine Kelly. At our meeting, we had what I consider a good engagement on the issues arising and discussion on how the scientific advice on the state of the fish stock may impact our quotas for the coming years. As the negotiations on quotas for 2023 were progressing, I met the industry representatives on the 22nd of November and discussed in detail all issues and our negotiating positions on quota setting for next year with them. I heard at that, hear their concerns and discussed the options that are likely to arise and how these may be pursued effectively to help support our fishing and processing sectors. As you're aware, multiple fisheries negotiations of direct concern for Ireland have been ongoing simultaneously for the past number of weeks, and this week alone, for example, has seen coastal state negotiations involving EU, Norway, UK, Faroes and Iceland on a new sharing arrangement for mackerel, as well as at the same time there's been bilateral negotiations between the EU and the UK, and also in parallel as well bilateral negotiations between the EU and Norway, and also then trilateral negotiations separate to that as well between the EU and the UK and Norway together on setting 2023 fishing opportunities for stocks which we all share. It's useful, I think, at the outset to reflect on the overall situation for the stocks of importance to us. The Common Fisheries Policy provides that total allowable catches and quotas are set at exploitation rates that can produce maximum sustainable yield. Fishing at maximum sustainable yield, or FMSY as it's known for short, is the largest average catch or yield that you can take that can continuously be taken from a stock under existing environmental conditions and without undermining the future health and sustainability of that stock. Progress is being achieved in terms of the sustainability of our fish stocks, and for this existing year, 38 of the fish stocks that are of interest to us are fished at below maximum sustainable yield. In 2013, it was only 20 stocks that were fished at or below maximum sustainable yield. So we've gone from fishing 20 stocks at below what was regarded as a sustainable level 9 years ago to increasing that now. 38 of our stocks have now reached that stage where we're fishing them at a level which is sustainable long term. The number of stocks which were overfished this year were 2020 or 15. Just to note that that's down by 22 on previous years. That's a significant achievement, and Ireland will continue to work with our stakeholders and the Commission and other member states and third countries as well to build on that progress and to achieve all of our objective, which is a healthy fish stock and sustainable fishing into the future. I'll now go into some specific detail, Cathaoirleach, on the main Irish concerns and how these will fit into next week's Agri-Fish Council meeting in Brussels. With regard to the EU-UK arrangements, those bilateral negotiations between ourselves and the UK have been going on now for 4 weeks, and I've been closely monitoring developments on an ongoing basis. Obviously, the EU-UK negotiations are something which we've only had for the last couple of years, and are as a result of Brexit. Prior to that, those negotiations, negotiations weren't
any issues at all. The
interference
anonymous programmatic audit that you talk about, had it been in place, is my understanding?
There we go, yeah. Prior to that, obviously, the UK were another member state, and the negotiation around stocks that we fish jointly with them would have been done as part of the December Fisheries Council meeting. But now that negotiation has to be completed with them before that we can settle our situation then within the EU. They're particularly important for us as almost all of our commercial stocks are dealt with under this bilateral process and involve stocks in which we have a very particular interest, such as Celtic Sea haddock and West of Scotland stocks, and also spurdock, to name a few. We have at EU level taken a position that there should be a common approach across sea basins in relation to how to manage mixed fisheries interactions. The UK have been seeking that all our targeted whitefish stocks and nephrops in the Celtic Sea are set at below the scientific advice. So what the UK have been saying in negotiations so far is, although a certain level of fishing is recommended as being scientifically sustainable, they are looking to set the quota at even less than what that is. That is their negotiating position at the moment. Here in Ireland and within the EU, we're fully committed to managing our fisheries in a sustainable way and to rebuilding depleted and overfished stocks. And we are continuing to promote the use of innovative technical measures for this as well, which would limit unwanted bycatches on overfished stocks. Bord Iascaigh has been very much to the forefront of working with industry to identify and then to trial effective measures. And the EU has accepted many of these measures too, and they're now a requirement for our mixed fisheries. We support fishing at maximum sustainable yield, and I think our and no doubt the committee here would likewise. And we're supportive of setting total allowable catches in all of our sea basins at this level and in accordance with the arrangements set down in the multi-annual management plan for Western Waters. Unfortunately, the EU and UK, as we speak, remain quite far apart on a number of issues, and this year, as in previous years, it appears that the UK are again attempting to use time pressure leading into the Council next week to seek concessions from the EU side. This, along with their demands to reduce total allowable catches below the scientific advice for stocks of no relevance to themselves, could undermine the economic well-being of our fleets. I've spoken to other EU fisheries ministers in this matter, and at my instigation, I, along with my fellow fisheries ministers from France, Spain, Netherlands, Denmark and Belgium, wrote formally to the EU Fisheries Commissioner Sinavicius last week to insist that these tactics must be resisted and we should not be afraid of no deal. We want to follow the scientific advice, and I can't accept going below the scientific advice except in exceptional circumstances where such a course of action is fully justified. Under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, we're obliged to try and reach agreement each year by the 10th of December or the 20th at the latest. If that proves impossible, then provisional catch allowances, taking account of seasonality, will have to be agreed at the Council meeting to be applied from the 1st of January, and talks with the UK would resume in that circumstance in the new year. The Council last year would have adopted provisional tax for the first 3 months of the year, and also this year before that, because of delays in securing agreement with the UK. While that situation isn't ideal, if needed, it does provide certainty and continuity for our fishing industry in the new year, particularly for the pelagic segment, which does most of its fishing in the first 3 months of the year. Provisional tax setting, to discuss that just a bit further, Cahirlock, the EU Commission made proposals for provisional tax setting for 2023 on Monday evening past. As I say, this is for the potential eventuality where there isn't agreement with the UK before the Council next week. So they announced on Monday what those provisional tax proposals would be. I'm seeking amendments to the proposals they've come forward with for a number of stocks to take account of take into account their seasonality, where they're fished more heavily at the start of the year than later on in the year. I'll be seeking that the full TAC and quota is set for mackerel and Atlanto-Scandian herring. If there's an EU-Norway agreement, I'll also be seeking that 100% of blue whiting is made available, and if the agreement isn't in place, that most of the TAC is available for the early part of the year. I'll also be seeking that the porcupine nephrops or prawns TAC reflects the seasonal pattern of that fishery. I'm hopeful that we can have an EU-UK agreement in place and that we do not need to set these provisional tax and quotas, but this is in reality an insurance package, and one that we might have to use, but it's important that we have it available. In relation to the Haigs, Cahirlock, I will of course be insisting on the invoking of the Hague preferences, which are an integral part of relative stability, and I'll be insisting that they're applied in the usual way on relevant stocks. We've always taken a cautious approach to applying them, taking into account the state of each stock, the economic necessity and the impacts on others with whom we need to cooperate. As you're aware, the Hague preferences are agreed by qualified majority voting in the Council, and many member states often strenuously object to the application of the Haigs as the additional quota for Ireland comes off their allocations. I'd like to assure the committee that ensuring the preferences are applied the normal way is an absolute priority objective for me in the negotiations. I wish now to set out our position, Cahirlock, in respect of blue whiting under an EU-Norway agreement. We have a small benefit from this agreement in our quota of Arctic cod. Norwegian access to Ireland's 200-mile zone and transferring EU blue whiting to Norway from Western waters is the key currency that the EU uses to pay for Arctic cod from Norway. For the past 2 years, I've engaged constructively on this issue, and the EU has agreed an approach that I have been able to support. This involved keeping the transfer of blue whiting to Norway at a manageable level, both in percentage terms, which was 4% of the global TAC, and in tonnes at 31,500. And that would have been down, Cahirlock, from what would have been a 9% transfer previous to that. So it was almost a halving of the transfer, but in percentage terms. As a concession to Norway and to support an agreement that benefited the other member states, I accepted in 2021 and 2022 that the Norwegian fleet would be granted access to EU waters for blue whiting to all of the Areas 6 and 7, which involves Ireland's 200-mile zone. This exceptional access agreement for Norway was conditional on EU transfers to Norway set at 31,500 tonnes, and in a situation where total Norwegian blue whiting fishing possibilities in the Irish 200-mile zone was very much lower than what is being talked about for this year, or for this coming year. I've made the case that the transfer of blue whiting to Norway should not increase above last year's level. I'm also pushing to have Norwegian access to the Irish zone limited to the total level allocated in 2022. I'm keeping a direct line of communication on these negotiations with Commissioner Sindavicius and have asked him to discuss any proposed movement in advance that goes beyond our stated position. With regard to coastal states mackerel, the third set of negotiations happening this week of high importance for us is the coastal states consultations on sharing on those. This involves the EU, Iceland, the UK, the Faroe Islands and Greenland. The last sharing arrangement ended in 2020, and since that we've had unilateral excessive quota setting by Norway, the Faroes and Iceland. I'm relatively pleased with how the talks are developing so far, as the Commission has taken on board Irish suggestions regarding how sharing arrangements might look in the future and our positioning in these talks. Ireland will continue to work closely with like-minded member states and engage with the Commission to keep the pressure on to get an increased share for the EU. There haven't been any significant developments in the talks this week, and the negotiations will resume in the new year. I will now turn back to other issues that will arise at the Council, beginning with bluefin tuna, which Ireland has access to a bycatch of bluefin tuna quota shared with a number of other member states. The fishing industry has been calling for a separate bluefin tuna quota for the Irish fleet for many years now. However, tuna is allocated each year to member states based on relative stability as established in the late 90s. At that time, Ireland didn't have a track record of commercial fishing for bluefin tuna, and accordingly, we didn't receive a quota allocation then. But things have changed. Before Brexit, the UK, like Ireland, as a non-quota holder, was only entitled to avail of a EU bycatch provision for bluefin tuna. Under the TCA, to reflect the arrangement when the UK was an EU member state, a small portion of the EU bluefin tuna quota was transferred to the UK. Separately, as a now independent contracting party to the international organisation that regulates tuna fishing, the UK has also received an additional 15 tonnes of quota. ICAT has now determined that the UK has a quota of 63 tonnes for the period 2023 to 25, and this is not subject to a bycatch only restriction. My view is that there is a case for an allocation if there is a case for an allocation for the UK, there is an equally strong case for Ireland within the EU, given the abundance of bluefin tuna in our waters. My team made clear to EU member states and the European Commission at the EU internal meetings during the course of last month's ICAT meeting that Ireland considers that there is a case for an allocation of part of the increase in the EU's bluefin tuna quota to be made available to Ireland for a targeted fishery. Given the prevalence of bluefin tuna in Ireland's exclusive economic zone, this is a request that we wish to be considered at Council. Opening up this issue will be difficult, and other member states have always strenuously resisted any discussion on amending relative stability for the stock. I have requested the opening of discussions at EU level to progress our case, and I will be making a formal statement to this effect at next week's December Agri-Fish Council. In relation to Area 2A4 mackerel TAC quota, Cahirlock, I want finally to turn to it and the issue of that TAC in Norwegian waters. In my view, the questions originally raised by ourselves about the continuation of this quota, which we raised in September 2021, have now been answered clearly by the legal analysis of the Commission, which was supported by the Council Legal Service. That analysis confirmed that the 2A, 4A Norwegian waters mackerel quota only ever existed in the context of reciprocal quota transfers between the EU Western Waters component and Norway. No Norway agreement in recent years means no transfer took place, which means the quota never left the Western Waters component, and that is the legal reality. That is why, in my view, the default position is that the full TAC amount should be made available as per the normal relative stability key as fishing opportunities to Western Water quota holders from whom it used to be transferred in the past. This view is strongly contested by Denmark, the long-standing beneficiaries of this quota. I've said all along that I fully accept that such a scenario would mean a significant quota loss to Denmark, and I am prepared to take account of that in our collective deliberations. The Commission put forward 5 possible ways forward, 3 of which could be possibilities that it could consider supporting. The most recent discussions showed that of those member states that expressed a preference, 5 were supportive of Ireland and 2 were supportive of the Danish position. Denmark continues to reject the Commission analysis and insist that the quota belongs to them in its entirety. This ignores the clear origin of the quota in Western waters. Given the divergent views and the concerns expressed by some that this issue could distract from the ongoing negotiations, the Presidency are inclined to leave the TAC for 2023 as to be established. This is far from desirable, as from my perspective it means that we have lost our rightful fishing opportunities in 2021, 22 and now possibly in 2023. That said, we do have a previous Council and Commission statement to the fact that whatever solution is ultimately found, it will be applied retrospectively. This is a complex issue, as illustrated by the length of time it has taken up to date, with no sign of an early resolution. However, Ireland has a strong case, and I will continue to press Irish interests for as long as it takes, and we have to see now how the issue evolves in Council. So thanks, Cathaoirleach and members, just again to recognise the work of the wider industry and stakeholders for their constructive engagement throughout this particularly busy and challenging period, and thanks also to the committee for their interest in it, and I look forward to engagement and discussion today on the Council meeting and how we make sure we have the best possible outcome from that. Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Collins.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and thank you, Minister, and your officials for coming before us today. I have a lot of questions, Minister, and I suppose the best thing is, in fairness, my colleagues here a lot of questions also, and I have to be fair to them. So I'll try and go through all of them maybe together, and you might be able to take note of them and maybe be able to answer. I have discussions on the quotas and the decommissioning, and that's coming up and it's of concern to a lot of fishermen. I suppose, look, in relation to bluefin tuna, and you did mention it here, quota, throughout the 1990s, Irish fishing boats from ports on the southwest coast targeting albacore tuna by means of drift nets also fished for caught and landed bluefin tuna in waters stretching from the Bay of Biscay to the Celtic Sea, while one boat in particular fishing from Castletownbere targeted bluefin tuna alone while fishing by means of long lines. At the EU December Council meeting held in December 1998, bluefin tuna became a EU quota species, and the then newly appointed Minister for the Marine, by his own admission in response to a Dáil question put to him upon his return from Brussels by former Minister Eamon Gilmore, admitted that Ireland had failed to apply for a share in the EU TAC permitted by ICAT for bluefin tuna. In every year following 1998, successive Irish ministers have failed and refused to even apply for a quota for Irish fishing boats to fish bluefin tuna, despite the fact that North Atlantic bluefin has in every year over the past 25 years gradually migrated its autumnal and winter feeding grounds north from the Bay of Biscay to the west and south coast of Ireland. This northwards migration of bluefin has proven by the results of research conducted on the bluefin tuna by scientists from both Stanford and Exeter universities working out of Galway, that was published in August of 2020. Having regard to the rights of coastal states under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982 UNCLOS, and in particular having regard to those same rights pursuant to the Agreement on Migratory and Straddling Stocks reached in New York in November 1995 in accordance with UNCLOS, can the Minister explain why it is that Ireland has alone not applied for bluefin tuna quota for Irish fishermen and women at any time since December 1998, but has in fact refused to apply for such quota? Is there any rational basis for this refusal to apply for bluefin tuna quota, having regard to the fact that the bluefin migrates northwards into Irish waters from late July of each year, where it remains while feeding on native Irish stocks of fish, including spawning and nursery stocks, until January, or as late as February, of followers years prior to its migration southwards to itself breed and spawn in tropical waters? You might be able to answer me that. There's far more on the bluefin tuna, but I have to move on to other issues as well. In relation to decommissioning, it's a very important issue, and there might be you might be able to answer the questions. Why are different criteria applying to boats decommissioning in other EU states than those being applied to Irish fishermen? That's one of the questions there. Second question, is it not true that fishing fleets in countries that were paid aid temporarily cease fishing activity will not have to pay back this money when they decommission their boats, as is required of Irish fishermen who are also temporarily ceased fishing? And the third question I was, in the conditions attached, if I'm going too fast, please stall me up and I can go back over it. In the conditions attached to the Irish tie-up scheme, were Irish fishermen notified that this money would be returned if you later applied to and were successful in accessing the decommissioning scheme? And the fourth question is, do you personally agree money paid to compensate these fishermen for loss of earnings should be returned? And have these fishermen not lost enough under this government by its gifting away of 25% of the actual fish they were catching? And the fifth question is, Minister, you will admit that 15% figure you keep saying, and I personally feel that's misleading, the Dáil on these issues, and you continuously say that. You say 15% figure, you keep saying that fishermen lost is incorrect, as this is a paper fish figure and does not reflect the fact that the actual fish given away represents a minimum of 25% of the fish they were catching and landing, Minister. And the last question, in fairness, I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but this is important. Minister, you were aware, and you always said to me, that the organisations are unanimous in relation to the decommissioning. You often accused me of not supporting it and didn't supporting it. Well, I never support it, and I would never support decommissioning. Minister, I want to make that quite abundantly clear to you. I will never support decommissioning, but fishermen have come to me and said it's over. The game is over as far as they're concerned. Their livelihoods have been ruined, and to support some aspects of it, to find can it be sped up so they can get out and put bread and butter on the table with a compensation package, which is sad. But Minister, you said to me that it was a unanimous agreement by all organisations. Are you aware that the Irish South and West Fishermen Producer Organisation insisted that the report produced by the task force must record the fact that their organisation would not sign up to the decommissioning scheme to be based on the criteria that were proposed in the report? This would clearly imply that the recommendations made by that task force were not unanimous. And can you answer me, did other members of the task force not also express similar views? Thank you.
I have a variety of questions there for the Minister.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Deputy Collins, and thanks, Cahir. So, first of all, in relation to bluefin tuna, Deputy Collins, so as I said at the outset, I am seeking a quota at this December Council meeting for bluefin tuna. And I'm putting the argument very much in relation to the experience with what has evolved with the UK as a very strong rationale for why Ireland should be able to be recognised in that regard. The historic situation would be that there wasn't a track record back of Ireland catching bluefin tuna back when the tax, the quotas were set back in the 90s, and not having the track record meant that there wasn't a quota allocated to Ireland at that time. But listen, certainly the situation has evolved since then in relation to the pattern of fish presence in Irish water, and that's something I believe needs to be recognised and taken into account at European level, and I certainly will be pushing hard for this. You know the same way as I do, given your experience in relation to fisheries, how challenging it is to change anything in relation to quota or tax. It's exceptionally difficult. Bluefin tuna obviously is a valuable fish, which is why we would certainly like some share of it and interest in it. But likewise, every member state who has a quota in relation to it will fight tooth and nail to hold what they have. So, but I certainly will be making the case very strongly in relation to that. And then we have an opportunity now to ask as well, because there's a new multi-annual management plan for bluefin tuna, which was adopted at ICAT this year, and that sets out a new allocation key sharing arrangement for bluefin tuna as well. So listen, that's the position in the backdrop there. I'll ask Dominic Rehan to come in on some of the questions around the decommissioning scheme. It's being administered by Bord Iascaigh Mhara in terms of the applications. We are operating the scheme out of the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. Other member states have also proposed a decommissioning scheme as well. My understanding of ours, the scheme we've come forward with, is very attractive compared to what's on offer from other member states in relation to the terms and conditions being made available and in that regard. But obviously, listen, to more than yourself, Deputy Collins, I would rather see a situation where we don't have a decommissioning scheme. I'd rather a situation where there was more than enough fish to ensure that that we have more fish for the boats that we have. I would much rather and fought to have a situation where we wouldn't have lost any fish in Brexit, and we fought very hard to try and have to protect our position in that. The unfortunate outcome was that Europe did lose quota, and of all the EU member states, we lost more than others. And the Marine Institute figures and calculations around what the impact of that is, which is what I use, is 15%. And as you know, then coming out of that, I put together the Sea Fisheries Task Force, bringing together the representatives of all our fishers and to consider how we would address the outcome of Brexit, firstly, but also fight hard at European level to try and improve our position on those two fronts, and consistently fighting at European level to improve our position in any way possible. But coming out of that task force, the unanimous recommendation from all organisations, and it was the fisher representatives who were part of that, was that there should be a decommissioning scheme to size the fleet to reflect the fact that our quota was less. And obviously, for those boats that remain in the fleet, the quota that's freed up from those who would decommission is reallocated to those, making them more economically sustainable in the time ahead, and they would have more quota. But it's not a decision any fisherman wishes or woman wants to takes very lightly. And likewise, it's not. It's not the situation we would want to be in, and we want to have more fish, absolutely. But we do have to address the situation in terms of where it's at, and be very much guided by the fishing representatives themselves in relation to that. And as I say, I'm responding to the task force report, which has come from them and which was unanimous from them as well. Listen, Dominic, you might take some of the questions in relation to the finer detail of the scheme. Thanks.
Yes, Deputy, just to answer your question on the payback of the tie-up. So with the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Regulation, there was a set of state aid guidelines produced by DG Comp, which set out the way that and the measures that could be funded under the BAR scheme for fisheries. One of the conditions around the temporary tie-up and the decommissioning was that any monies paid out in any other scheme had to be paid back. And that applied to our tie-up monies. So when our decommissioning scheme was sent to DG Competition for state aid approval, one of the conditions they insisted on being in was that the tie-up monies were paid back. Without that condition, they wouldn't have approved the scheme, and we wouldn't have a decommissioning scheme. We did get one concession there. The way our tie-up scheme had been set out, where a third of the tie-up money was paid directly from crew, we did get agreement with the Commission that shouldn't be paid back, because the vessel owner was getting obviously no benefit of that. It was going to the crew, not to the vessel owner. So we did get that concession, but it was a condition of the scheme. It was the assistance of the Commission. We did try hard to get it out. We pointed out the unfairness of it. But as I say, without that condition, we wouldn't have had approval for the scheme. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Deputy Collins.
Yeah, why are the different criteria applying to boats decommissioning in other EU states than those being applied to our Irish fishermen?
I mean, the other schemes reflect the different fleet composition, fleet structure. In the other member states, a lot of particularly the French scheme, is very much targeted at vessels who traditionally fished in the Channel, have been displaced from UK waters and waters around Jersey and Guernsey. Their scheme reflects those vessels. Similarly, there's a Dutch decommissioning scheme which reflects the fact that their beam trawl fleet has been very badly impacted by Brexit, and again their scheme reflects that. The criteria are different, but again, all the other member states went through the state aid approval that we did. Their schemes reflect their proposals and the outcome of the negotiation they had with DG Competition. I can't speak for DG Competition, obviously, of why, if there are differences there, but it is very much about reflecting what those fleets are, what those schemes are trying to achieve. And in our case, our scheme was really about trying to balance our fishing opportunities with our fleet capacity in our whitefish sector, and that's where we've ended up. Thanks.
Just one additional one.
That'll come on automatically.
Just one additional point, Deputy. In a lot of other member states, the capacity of the vessel is not a private commodity. In Ireland, it is a private commodity, and therefore, when people are decommissioning, that's the most valuable part of the commodity that they are relinquishing. In other member states, the commodity that's owned by fishermen is a private quota. The quota is privatised, and therefore that's what they would be relinquishing in some of those other member states. So obviously the structure of the payments reflects the nature of the fisheries management system that has grown up and developed in the different member states. In Ireland, the quota is a national asset, but the capacity is privately owned. So the decommissioning scheme must reflect that.
Yeah, and one of the questions I asked there, is it not true that fishing fleets in countries that were paid aid to temporarily cease fishing activity will not have to pay back this money when they decommission their boats, as is required by Irish fishermen who also temporarily ceased fishing?
I think that's the point that Dominic addressed.
I don't think any other member states did a temporary tie-up scheme. I don't think, did they? Not that I'm aware of.
France did.
France do, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And
But it might, I don't know, it may be that where in some countries the money that was paid for some of the other initiatives may be national money rather than EU funding, and that would affect the situation. In Ireland, the funding that was paid was EU funding.
certainly from the inquiries I've made, the scheme that we put together, the decommissioning scheme, is more generous to applicants than what other decommissioning schemes that member states are bringing in is, because we've tried to reflect the impact for those that do take it up as much as possible. It's a very significant decision. Listen, I suppose the other point, we were the first to do decommissioning because I put together the Sea Fisheries Task Force to advise me on how we could do this. As I say, it's not as that nobody ever wants to be decommissioning. We'd all want to have more fish, but we all have to live and deal with the reality that is dealt and that that's in front of us. And the fisheries representatives, the fishermen and fisherwomen representatives and stakeholders asked me to put in place that scheme to deal with that challenge. Now, subsequently, we have seen other member states come forward with decommissioning schemes as well, post-Brexit. And certainly, a lot of people would have been saying to me at the start, oh, listen, we're the only one doing decommissioning. We're obviously the only ones that are being hit by Brexit. And I've always said that, listen, across the EU, all fleets, pretty much all fleets have been hit by Brexit. We've taken a disproportionate burden, something I want to see addressed. But I think the fact other member states have moved to introduce decommissioning schemes now as well is a reflection of the fact that Brexit has impacted on them too. Albeit I've always been clear, they've been impacted less than what we have. And as something I would like to I continue to seek to have addressed and continue to seek in relation to the Common Fisheries Policy Review as well, that is very much part of the considerations for that.
Yeah, just fair enough. Just one thing, that is, in my view, it's money coming from the EU for decommissioning of boats, and surely if it's what's applied in France or Spain, it has to be applied same in Ireland. Obviously, it isn't. So there's more flexibility in other EU states than in here, and that's why if they have a temporary cease fishing activity, they will not have to pay back this money, but the Irish seems to, from what I can see, have to. So that there's something funny going on there.
What I'd say as well, Deputy Collins, so that was clear from the outset. So in advance of the tie-up schemes being announced, it would have been clear that anybody taking the tie-up scheme wouldn't have been able, or it would have had to be deducted from the decommissioning scheme. So it's not something that would have came late in the day. So anybody that was considering potentially doing the decommissioning would have been aware of that in terms of deciding to tie up or not. And where they didn't tie up and avail of the tie-up scheme, but vessels that obviously weren't planning to decommission would have, then those vessels that didn't tie up would have been able to avail of the additional quota that would have been available to them from the vessels that were tied up. So there'd been some benefit for those. Let's say if you were planning on decommissioning or you were seriously considering it, you probably would have avoided taking the tie-up scheme and you would have kept fishing. You would have availed of the extra quota was available in those months for fishing by virtue of the fact that 1 in 3 boats were tied up and they weren't using their quota on the basis that you were planning for the decommissioning scheme. But as Dominic said, this was an insistence in terms of the European Commission, so it wasn't something that was optional, but it was clear from the outset and clear in advance of the tie-up scheme. So I don't think there would be many who are planning to decommission who would have availed of the tie-up scheme because they would have been aware of the situation in advance of the tie-up scheme and would have been more likely to stay fishing than to tie up.
Okay.
Dominic, do you want to come in separately? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just to say that it is a condition, there's a German decommissioning scheme, and I know it is a condition of that. You could well be right about the French scheme. It may be different there, but it's certainly in the German scheme, it is an absolute condition that money has to be paid back.
As I say, I do think, my information is that our decommissioning scheme is a lot stronger and a lot more generous than what the French one is.
Pierre Sullivan.
And just to thank Deputy Joe Flaherty for allowing me to take his speaking slot. He said that fishing wasn't a stronghold in Longford yet, but with rising sea levels, that might change. So hopefully not. Interesting that it's Cork and Donegal as well represented at least in the committee room here today as well. I think it says a lot. But just to say at the outset, Minister, there was a very welcome announcement today in relation to the BAR and funding for marine infrastructure around the coast. Cork County, I'm delighted to say, received over €6 million in funding for marine infrastructure. Some very welcome projects there, some that had already been indicated to be funded under the BAR funding, like Cunnamer Pier and Lartana Valley to the west, and some have new projects that have received funding, such as Skull Pier, and very close to me, Courtmacsherry is going to receive funding for a brand new pontoon, which is extraordinarily welcome and much needed down there in Courtmac. So good work. We have always outlined the potential of the marine, the coastal area of Cork, whether it's from fishing or marine leisure activities, and this will allow it to realise that potential. I would like to see further funding, though. I mean, a lot of these projects would have been shovel-ready, but there are a lot of improvement works that need to be carried out on piers right throughout West Cork that aren't shovel-ready. They may require foreshore, and I would love to see some type of pot being put in place to allow local authorities to start that, to start those works or to start those licences or whatever they need. And as well as that, look, I heard your input in relation to holding your ground in relation to the Celtic Sea TAC and the UK position there, and that's very welcome. We support you on that. But just a couple of questions, and I might just go back and forth on the different ones. Been contacted a lot this week by the inshore sector with a specific concern about the shrimp market. Shrimp market is collapsing this week. They were getting about €20 a kilo. That's gone down to about €11 a kilo, and in some areas they've actually stopped taking shrimp altogether. The vast majority of the shrimp, at least in Cork, and I'm not sure the situation nationally, is going to Spain. A good high percentage of it, and essentially they've stopped taking it for various different reasons. So that is leaving a lot of those inshore fishing boats in quite a vulnerable position. And again, now is the time, I suppose, to re-underline their call for some type of support scheme, following on from the inshore support scheme that was announced last year, where boats were able to avail of up to €2,700. That was incredibly welcome, but we need another scheme of the same scale or even bigger to address the situation with the inshore sector. They are facing the same difficulties as every other sector, but this crisis with the shrimp market is highlighting even further. So I wonder if you're aware of that, or if there's, and if you've considered any further supports for the inshore sector in light of that crisis.
Thanks, Deputy Sullivan. And listen, first of all, in relation to the harbours and marinas funding, I think it is going to make a significant difference in impact. I know the funding, the 6 million for Cork, will be significant. And the other step I took today as well was increasing the co-funding requirement to 95%. Previously, and whenever I launched Tranche 1 funding back at the start of the year, it was 80% co-funding for most vast majority of projects. That's now gone to 95%, and I've done that retrospectively as well. So previously announced funds that Cork would have got earlier in the year will now be funded to the tune of 95% too. So that should relieve the pressure that this significant funding is putting on the local authority in terms of their co-funding aspect as well, and just to recognise your own advocacy in relation to those projects that got funded. In relation to the shrimp, and I know it's something that you have made representations to me on, and it's a challenge certainly that seems to be emerging. The inshore sector is obviously, it's a really important sector in terms of employment. I know it's important in your part of the country as well, and that €2,700 for the inshore sector was a significant in relation to supporting them throughout or coming out of the Brexit, and the payment rates were for over 10-metre boats. It was €4,000 per vessel, and overall we had 790 applications to that. So listen, I'm aware of the importance of the sector. I'll continue to engage with you on it. There's challenging market situation there, which, listen, ultimately we've limited control on, but I'll certainly continue to work and closely engage with you on it.
Thanks. And just following on from that, all sector, inshore, pelagic, polyvalent, they all need support in terms of fuel. And I know it's something that's been called for regularly. I know it's something that has been done in other EU countries, and again, I guess I just using this opportunity to reiterate that the need for that support, that you'd look at it. I know you've spoken positively of it in recent weeks, but again, look, the fuel costs, the escalating fuel costs, it does not seem to be easing off anytime soon. So those challenges are still there, and it's very much eating into the margins that. Whatever size boat that you're fishing with, whatever species that you're targeting, the fuel is becoming a bit of a barrier. And I'm just wondering, have you any update on that, or any comment to make on that? Yeah,
no, obviously it has been a real challenge this year across the economy, but it's been a particular challenge for fisheries in relation to the cost of fuel, given the high percentage of overall costs of going fishing that fuel actually is. And we were limited in relation, we didn't have capacity to do anything from a purely revenue point of view in relation to marine gas oil, because of the fact that there isn't any revenue applied to it. There isn't any taxation on it other than VAT, which is fully reclaimable. So our levers in that regard were non-existent because there's no tax on it. So what I did do,
unless you have an outboard petrol engine, there is tax on that, or you can't claim it back.
So what I did do was introduce a second month of the tie-up scheme, which finished there at the end of November, in relation to ensuring that fishing was viable and economical for those going fishing. So there was 1 month proposed of a tie-up scheme in response to Brexit through the Sea Fisheries Task Force. I increased that to a second month post the invasion of Ukraine, so that for boats going fishing they had more fish to catch, and therefore it made the economics of it stack up in recognition of the fact that fuel was a significant and increased burden. I have been engaging with the industry and sector around their request and the pressure that remains there around fuel. I'm engaging at government level as well over the last period of time in relation to the capacity and potential for support. Very much aware in the event that if I can succeed in delivering something, which remains, it's very much in discussion at the moment, the importance of the inshore sector in that regard. And as you know, coming out of Brexit, whether it's the €2,700 or the 4,000 for over 10 metres, the inshore sector is a sector that we have sought to support, and I know you've raised this issue with me in relation to the fuel pressure that's there, and it's very much on my radar as well in relation to discussions that I'm having. But listen, it's under discussion at the moment.
Thanks, Minister. And a final question, if that's okay, Chair. You know, obviously, Deputy Collins has outlined some of the challenges that the sector has faced. We're all very aware of the challenges that the sector has faced, especially in the last few years and especially in the wake of Brexit. But surely there is an opportunity for a bit of a clawback and a bit of a reprieve for the sector if we can sort out or address the issue of Rockall Island and the being able to fish the grounds in and around Rockall. I just Googled it there very quickly, and the first line that comes up is that Rockall Island is an uninhabited island. And obviously there's significance behind that, in that if you can establish that an island is uninhabited or uninhabitable, then it, therefore the 12 mile or the 12 kilometre exclusion zone should not therefore apply to it. As you are well aware, it's very important for a lot of Irish boats for some non-quota species. So again, Minister, I would love to see that revisited for, you know, whatever about the sovereignty, or whatever about who claims sovereignty over it. The fact that it's uninhabited means that the 12 kilometre or mile exclusion zone shouldn't apply, and therefore those boats that traditionally went to fish there should be allowed to fish there again. And I would like to see that revisited, please, Minister.
I know it is an important fishery, Deputy, and one where Ireland, as you know, we've never made any claims to Rockall, but we've never recognised British sovereignty over Rockall, and accordingly we've never recognised a 12 nautical mile territorial sea around it either, and that remains the position of the government. So at any opportunity, the government is engaging with regard to the 12-mile access within the 12-mile, and will continue to do so. I know last year as well, given the economic impact, it's a relatively small number of boats that are impacted by the squid fishery, but it's a really important fishery for them. I know it's important to boats in Cork and indeed in Greencastle and Donegal, as well as some other ports and harbours as well. Last year, in recognition of the impact that economic loss was to them, I provided additional flexibilities under the tie-up scheme to recognise the fact that the squid fishery wasn't open for them, but it is something we continue to pursue, Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, sir.
McLaughlin.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. It's just a pity that we couldn't have had this the other way around this evening, that we would have had the fish producer organisations presenting, and then you could have been observing that and then responding. I think it would have been and it's just a pity your schedule didn't permit that to happen. I think it would be a much more productive way of doing things. What we do have is the submissions from the producer organisations that have been submitted, and they make for very sober reading. And I mean, this one in particular from the Irish Fish Producers Organisation, it really is, it's disturbing is the only way to describe it. So if you look at fish processing per country, Ireland in 2015 had a total value of 627 million. Today, or sorry, not today, but in 2020, that had reduced to 325 million. That's almost halved in 5 years. So that's the context in these negotiations. So you know, leading into Brexit, we've seen the halving of the value of our processing industry. That's just devastating. You then get into the landing of Irish vessels. It's really, I've seen a lot of data as my party spokesperson on fisheries and the marine, but this one is just utterly devastating. You see the landing by Irish vessels reduced from 2012 to 2021. It's now reduced by a third. If you look at the landing of foreign vessels, it's increased by 145%. So that says what it says. That's the Irish fishing industry is declining, and more vessels, foreign vessels, are landing here. Than more and more. That gap is widening all the time. Turnover, Ireland, I think, went from third in value as a seafood industry down to 10th. Remember that we have, I think we have certainly one of the longest coastlines comparable certainly to northern European countries. This is an immense resource that we have. How can it be that the value of our seafood processing industry is halved before Brexit? We'll get to Brexit in a second. So that's just, I mean, I just ask you, Minister, this submission, I assume, Chairperson, this submission can be made available to the Minister, is that right?
Oh yeah, the multi-stations are on Teams.
Yeah, so I just asked, Minister, if you take a look at that, it's an Irish Fish Producers Organisation, and it's devastating. That's the only way to describe it. That's the context of our industry. So that's before you get to Brexit. Brexit then, it's in this report, but also in the submission by Sean O'Donoghue from the Killybegs Fishermen's Organisation, that we took the, so 40% of the loss, so 40% of the EU's loss in fisheries due to the UK and Europe Trade and Cooperation Agreement, 40% of the loss was taken by Ireland, 40%. That was after the devastating loss that we'd seen leading into Brexit. There's never been any burden sharing, never been an acceptance of fair burden sharing, or levelling up, as some in the industry referred to it. And then you have a situation where, rather than give us a fair share, fishermen, you know this, Minister, they want to fish. They don't want to be tied up, they want to fish, but they've been tied up and now they're being decommissioned. And we're looking at the white fish sector now soon being 1/3 of what it was 15 years ago. 1/3. There's only 2 island nations in the European Union, Cyprus and Ireland, only 2. And we're now down to 1/3 of a white fish sector that we were 15 years ago. I've told you already about the devastating decline in the value of the processing industry. That's jobs, that's wealth, lost all across our communities. And I just don't see any evidence that there's any improvement in solidarity. I mean, in terms of the European Union, and that is a failure, a diplomatic failure of our state in negotiations. There's no other way around that. That there wasn't burden sharing, there was not fairness for a state that already had a deeply declining seafood sector, despite the length of its coastline. I think that Belgium has a bigger industry, seafood industry, even though it's a fraction of our coastline. Germany has a smaller coastline than Ireland. It has multiples of a seafood industry than ours. But then you get into this scenario now, and I just want to ask a number of questions in the time that I have left. Are you aware, Minister, that this Norwegian request in terms of blue whiting is an entirely new and additional request, and it's beyond any existing arrangement regarding blue whiting and access, so it's entirely new. What did Ireland submit pre-September to the Commission regarding our priorities on the issue of blue whiting? So what was our position? What did we ask for? What was our plan? The Marine Institute recently shared graphics on the migratory pattern of the blue whiting, and including its stockbook data. So this additional access that the Norwegians are looking for would provide them with ease of access in our exclusive economic zone to blue whiting worth over 120 million, while Ireland remains with a quota of 11.8 million euro. And then finally, Minister, are you willing to defend the industry's position and vote to deny the additional access to the Norwegians in 2023 and to keep them north of the 56-degree line and likewise west of the 10-degree line. So that's my couple of questions on that, and I hope to come back then further.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Cahill, and thanks, Deputy McLaughlin. So listen, firstly, in relation to, it would have been preferable, I think, to have the fishing organisations earlier rather than later. I certainly have had them earlier. I've been engaged with them on an ongoing basis. I met them about 10 days ago for 3 hours. I met them shortly before, not so long before that as well, to discuss all of these issues. So there's nothing new in this to me. I've been fully plugged into it and fully battling the national position and working closely with our industry representatives in relation to that, and indeed encouraging our industry representatives to take the battle to their industry colleagues in other member states as well, because, as you know, in the same way as I respond to our fishing sector here to try and support it and get the best outcome possible for it, likewise other governments do the same in relation to their industries, and it's important our industry brings that argument to the European industry arena and advocates there, as I do at political level then within Europe. So listen, I think I got this request to attend today last week, I think. So listen, obviously that's short notice for me, but I did my best and wanted to be here to accommodate that. So so in the same way, in terms of my schedule not being able to go later, Deputy McLaughlin, the option was open to the committee if your schedule had been able to accommodate it earlier too. So listen, I did my best to be able to be here, and I'm sure you had your logistical challenges around not being able to facilitate it the other way around too. Listen, in relation to the figures you gave around the processing industry and figures over the years, there's variables there. Obviously, we have what we catch ourselves, and then we have also what we take in for processing from other fleets, because most of our processing plants, particularly as you know in Killybegs, they're very active, not only in relation to landing every piece of Irish quota that's possible into our processing factories, but also trying to be competitive in terms of attracting in all fish from any fleet, because the more fish that comes in, the more we have to process, the more fish we have to add value to, and the more employment that's there in our processing sector for that, and that's something they're very proactive on, and that can be variable. In relation to the overall figures then in terms of processing over the years.
These statistics that I quoted from are Eurostat data bank, so the submission's been made for that. So can I just clarify, are you saying that this information is wrong, that the Irish, the full value of the of fish processing indicators for Ireland did not reduce from 627 to 325 in 5 years?
No,
in other words, half in 5 years. The total value halved in 5 years, according to these statistics. No, are you disputing that?
It's not what I didn't say that at all, Deputy McLaughlin. The point I was going to go on to make next is that in relation to relative stability and our shares of quotas, our own national quotas in terms of our share of the European quota, that the relative shares we've had of various stocks, fish stocks, which obviously, you know, we're engaging with other non-EU member states on at the moment, our relative shares of those were set in the early 80s under relative stability. And despite the annual battles and indeed the reviews, the common fisheries policy that's happened since then, those allocation keys have remained constant. So in relation to our shares of quotas, they've been constant. The big impact on our quotas since relative stability was established in the early 80s for most of our stocks was the Brexit impact in the last 2 years, which was significant, which I continue to try and have addressed at European level. What we have seen as well is, I mean, changes over the years, like I outlined at the start in my submission, how we've been moving in recent years at European level, using the same allocation keys and using the same relative stability percentages within member states, but we've been moving to a situation whereby the vast majority of our fishing stocks were fished at unsustainable levels. So we were overfishing at European level. And now the scientific data wasn't necessarily always as strong as it is now to actually know that that was the case, but we were overfishing. So obviously, where you're overfishing, you have a bigger quota. And now our percentage of it has always remained the same, but we have all been trying to move to a situation where we're fishing at a sustainable yield level, so we're not taking more out. than what is sustainable. Deputy Cahill will know this well from a farming point of view, where a farmer doesn't reduce his number of cows because he'll have less calves the next year. So he maintains the breeding stock at a sustainable level, not reducing it below that level. It's easy to do at a farm level where somebody owns their herd and can see that. It's much harder to do where you have open seas and the fish roam all over the place and you depend on everybody to manage it. And over the last number of years, we've gone to a situation whereby we've been trying to manage stocks at sustainable yield levels. Thankfully, we've made progress in that. It's in all our interests long term that we do fish at sustainable yield levels, otherwise the stock gets eroded. We've seen that with herring, whereby many ports, you go back to Downings in our own country, Buncrana, our own town, your local town, ports around the country were coming down with herring over the generations. It was a great industry. That fishery is now closed because it was overfished, and it's now in recovery mode. Likewise, we see it with with cod, really, really important in stock as well. So that has an impact. The quotas haven't changed, but potentially what the amount of fish that's landed has changed. For a lot of it, I'd say, down to sustainable yields. Some fisheries being closed because they were overfished, and also the other particular variable there is in relation to what we're processing coming from other fleets, for which our fish factories are always very competitive in terms of trying to attract. So in relation to Brexit then, and the burden sharing, again, Deputy McLaughlin, as you know, that's something I have been absolutely adamant on at European level over the last couple of years in terms of actually pointing out the unfair burden we took as part of that. I was absolutely forthright in relation to the negotiations as well, in relation to actually seeking to protect our national position. Worked very closely with the industry in relation to that, was very insistent in relation to the engagement I had at European level. And as I've said to you before as well, I remember at the very time where it was in the mix, there was a 2.5 week period where there wasn't a word out of Sinn Féin at that time in relation to where Brexit negotiations were ongoing and where fish was very much under threat, and the deal...
I might be in your shoes someday, and then we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but so anyway, and listen, I'll move on to the blue whiting. So in relation to what we've... This is something that I've sought to make... There's been a couple of negotiations, okay. Over the last 2 years, I have had success working at European level in relation to reducing the transfer of blue whiting. The first year I started these negotiations, the previous transfer the year before that had been at a rate of 9%. We succeeded in reducing that to 4% the year before last, and we held it at that this for 2022. Last year, the total value of the transfer of blue whiting to Norway was 31,500. If it had been at the previous rate of 9%, it would have been near 70,000 tonne of a transfer. So we managed to get it reduced from around where it was 70,000 tonne of a transfer to about 31,000 tonne of a transfer. That meant, in terms of what was available to our fisheries nationally last year and this year, roughly, I think we had an extra 10,000 tonne because of that, available, like 10,000 tonne quota more. But again, this is done every year. It's a negotiation every year. We're in a new mix and we're in a new battle and a new fight and a new engagement, and there's no guarantee that we will have the success we had the last 2 years. The backdrop this year, starting off, is that the scientific advice from ICES for blue whiting is that it should increase by 81%. So therefore, all things being equal, it's a good starting position, all things being equal, quota would go up by 81% this year compared to last year. But there is this issue around the transfer to Norway, and how that evolves. There's also the issue of where Norway can get access to fish their quota. It doesn't change, the transfer obviously would change their quota, but they also have a quota of their own. And like with mackerel, where we fish a lot of our quota in the North Sea and outside Irish waters, other fleets would fish blue whiting in our waters. So that's up for debate and discussion as well. My objective here is to get the best possible outcome we can for ourselves, to restrict the transfer to the lowest possible. Our starting position in terms of our negotiation was to hold it at what it was at last year, which was 31,000 tonne. Now that would represent a percentage reduction from the 4% transfer last year, because as I say, the overall advice is for an 81% increase in quota. So but that's their starting position. That'll be difficult to hold, but that's our negotiation position. And also our negotiation position is to restrict any access from Norway into Irish waters to fish their share. This is something will evolve. It's ongoing. There was negotiations last week. They didn't conclude. They broke down. They're ongoing again this week, but we're holding a very hard line. And we'll continue to battle hard to get a good outcome. Ultimately, then, it does come down. Ultimately, all of it gets mixed. The Norwegian issue, in terms of blue whiting, and all of the other issues as well, go into an overall package, and it's qualified majority voting at European level ultimately. So you have to engage with other member states and stay relevant to the negotiation too, because if you make yourself irrelevant by putting yourself off the pale, whereby you're not going to be part of actually reaching an ultimate agreement, then other member states don't pay as much attention to you if you're irrelevant to the negotiation. So you have to get the best possible outcome you can, but that also involves staying in the mix and not being and so that's the objective, and that's where we're at.
Okay. Deputy Pringle.
I'll come back.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And I just would agree with what David McLaughlin was saying about the. It would have been more helpful if the other fishery organisations could be in advance of the Minister coming in here today. And I know that it's not the Minister's responsibility, but given that this series is part of an annual event, and that there maybe is something that you could be set out on an annual basis that they would be in before the Minister, so that we can have a more constructive consideration. I think that's something that the committee should take on board and work with. In relation to the a number of questions just in relation to the different aspects of the negotiations and that there, just and you have touched on some of them, but I just want to look at what you actually mean, Minister, in relation to some of the statements you make in your statement and that there. For instance, in relation to the coastal states mackerel, you state that that you're relatively pleased with what is happening there in relation to that. What actually does that mean? And what does that mean for the actual fishing results from the outcome of the talks?
Well, I'm pleased in that the Irish position has been taken on board and recognised by the Commission. Obviously, the negotiations are ongoing, but I was referring simply to our starting point there, and the Commission recognising our position and taking that on board in relation to how they're approaching the negotiations.
So
but we have a lot, like the negotiation has to play out yet.
So the Commission has recognised our position, so that aspect goes into the overall mix in and whatever happens. Yeah. So does that mean that our position, if the Commission have recognised our position, that our position is the European position?
Yeah, it's been that has been very much informative in relation to forming the European position. There will be the other sides of the negotiations will have a different view. There's no way of knowing how this play out. I'll be holding and keeping a very clear line of communication with the Commissioner in relation to trying to hold it to what we've established, but that's all to play out. And
at a previous meeting here a while back, we were talking about that if the Norwegians and the Faroese and the Icelandics and stuff like that there don't agree to it, the option is open there for the EU to actually pursue a legal case in relation to that. Is there any appetite for that, or do you envisage any idea that they might do that, or anything? Is that totally off the scale altogether?
Cecil or Dominic, do you want to come in on this point, or
Sorry,
did you re-listen to that?
Sorry, on blue whiting, I was.
No, so
listen.
Obviously,
mackerel
what I'd say
isn't concluded. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
I know it's not concluded.
So what I'd say is, obviously, I mean, what's been happening is entirely unsustainable, entirely unacceptable.
Unsustainable for a number of years now.
So where we're at the moment is obviously negotiations are ongoing. Ideally, people would cop on and we would get a sensible approach, because what's been happening is unsustainable. Ultimately, the fish will be gone, it'll be fished unsustainably, and it'll be kapoosh. So it can't go on. What's important is in relation to the European position, we continue to take a hard line. We don't see our position eroded. And I think then, and I've advocated strongly at European level then that we need to take, look at what steps we can take to increase leverage in relation to other steps. But I think at the moment, let's engage in relation to the cooperative approach and trying to get to bring sense to the equation and actually get an outcome that is sensible long term.
That hasn't been acceptable. Hasn't been successful up to now.
No, and there hasn't been any other, there hasn't been any other steps taken so far by the Commission either, no.
And is the Commission willing to take other steps?
Well, so far it hasn't happened. I've advocated strongly that it should, but so far it hasn't happened.
You've advocated for the Commission
I have,
strongly,
yeah,
you said.
yeah.
And what's the Commission response been?
Well, the Commission's response is that they have been advocating very strongly themselves in relation to the unsustainability, but we haven't seen any steps taken in that regard. I hope, Deputy Pringle, that it's now 2020, it's over 2 years since the last agreement fell, it's in no one's interest to see this situation continue, but let's hope that we can reach agreement.
But if you've been advocating to the Commission that they should be pushing this view, that there should be other steps taken. The Commission have accepted that argument and they're pushing that. So whose actual decision is it?
Ultimately by the Commissioners and the Commissions.
So they've already accepted the argument?
Pardon?
They've already accepted the argument?
Which
that
argument?
it's unsustainable and that
Oh yeah,
absolutely,
absolutely, yeah.
So,
and in fairness, the Commission have been, the grown-ups in relation to the need for sustainable, and in fairness, when you look at the approach we're taking at European level in relation to managing our fisheries, we're trying to follow science. We're trying to make sure that all of the stocks, we get to a stage where all of our stocks are fished at sustainable yields. The Commission have been, and the EU have been very responsible and proactive in relation to the engagement with other coastal states in relation to the need to follow the science and to take proportionate shares of that as well. And listen, this is something I wrote not so long ago to the Commissioner as well, laying out our strong position in relation to it. But listen, we're in the middle of negotiation now. Hopefully there'll be a better result than what it was other years. But if not, we'll take it up again then following on from that.
and what hope that next year will be better?
Well, listen,
and will the Commission hope that next year will be better as well?
well, listen, I think where we're at the moment is we'd all hope there'd be an outcome and a conclusion, a negotiated outcome as part of the negotiations that are underway at the minute.
Yes, okay, so, and in relation to the mackerel in Norwegian waters, that you say as well that you accept the Danish position in relation to the quota that they have, the Danish quota. So what exactly does that mean?
Did I accept what, sorry?
The Danish position on the quota for the mackerel in...
Yeah. So, well, basically, this is something that this is something that we have identified and taken up the mantle on, and I want to recognise the role of our fisheries attaché, Colm O'Sullivan, at Brussels level, working with my own team here, who very much put this on the agenda and the radar at European level. Basically, what happened in the past, there was a transfer of mackerel from Western waters to Norwegian waters, and then because there was an agreement with Norway, Denmark traditionally had been fishing that quota in Norwegian waters. That has been going on, I think, 20, 30 years. The total importance of that mackerel to the Danish is that it amounts to about, that quota is worth about 40% of their entire mackerel industry. So it's obviously a massive piece for them. But we've been making the case very clearly that in the absence of a Norwegian access or a Norwegian agreement, that transfer doesn't take place out of Western waters to Norway, and therefore that should stay in European waters, and we should be able to fish that instead. Now, it's being a hot topic. I was accused at the EU Council meeting of trying a midnight heist by the Danish for trying to get for raising this and for addressing it. Obviously, no more than the way we fight for our mackerel and fight for our fish, other member states, and you can see the importance it is to them. But the legal position, the Commission's legal situation does back up the merits of the argument we're making. It's now very much in the discussion of trying to reach an outcome and be trying to ensure that there's as successful an outcome as we can get in relation to that. But it is something we have identified, we've gone after, and we continue to try and to achieve progress on.
It's good that we're fighting for something at that level.
Fighting for a lot of things, definitely.
I think that's very important. In relation to the bluefin tuna, you say that the British have got a quota for bluefin tuna now because of the Brexit and stuff like that there, and that gives an equality for Ireland and in relation to the EU. What kind of argument is that accepted by the Commission, or is it acceptable within the EU? Or
Well, no more than, and I've seen it, no more than any other, but even more that, well, I shouldn't say no more, because even more than any other species, bluefin tuna is, every kilo of it is fought over. And I saw this last year in relation to debate, and it was fought over to the last kilo, and it's highly sought after. So listen, other member states, it's the quota is set. Like with other stocks and species, it's set based on allocation keys, based on fishing track record. The challenge was we didn't have that fishing track record whenever the relative stability around bluefin tuna was set in the 90s. I've outlined in my remarks how we believe that has changed in relation to now that the UK have left, and also the agreement at ICAT. So listen, no member state will be in any way willing to give away a kilo of or to see. But listen, likewise, I'll be going at this full tilt as well. But we know that the challenges involved in that and how difficult that is. But
And when can we expect to see a resolution or an outcome?
well, listen, it will be. I'll be putting it. I'll be the one putting it on the agenda at the December Fisheries Council meeting. It's important we fight that battle and take that battle. But any gain that we would ultimately get, again, like everything else, is qualified majority voting. And any gain we would get would be at the expense of other member states who have a share already. So it will be sharply resisted, no doubt.
Okay. In relation to the decommissioning and stuff like that, do you see the decommission that has been proposed there now of 64 vessels and stuff like that there, do you see that has been adequate and has been the end of the decommission as far as you're concerned, or is?
The advice I got from the fishing representatives and the Sea Fisheries Task Force was that was the level that we should be going for, and it has been subscribed to the level. There is the subscriptions and the applications has fully subscribed the level that we had sought. So based on that assessment from the Sea Fisheries Task Force, it remains to be seen if everyone will actually follow through in their application. But listen, it's not an easy decision for those that decide to do it. It's a lifelong livelihood. But now for those that remain in the fleet, obviously they will be economically stronger because the quota that's freed up from the boats that decommission will be reallocated to the existing fleet. So they therefore have more fish to fish than they would have had otherwise. But remains to be seen. I don't know, Dominic, if you have any more insight into that.
I mean, just in terms of the way that the calculation was done, I mean, the idea is by taking out that amount of capacity, it brings the remaining boats back to the level of profitability that they were at post or pre-Brexit. So that's the idea behind it, is that you would return the boats that remain to where they were pre-Brexit. That's the whole idea of it.
So is the view is that the fishing was sustainable in 2016?
Well, if you look at the profitability levels there, they are, they're reasonable for the sector that's there. That's what we based it on, is those figures as the best available we had at the time.
Okay. Minister, you said in your response as well that the fishing groups looked for the decommission and stuff like that there, that they looked for it. Is that your view, that this is totally in agreement with the fishing groups and that this is what they want?
That was the Sea Fisheries Task Force report I received was unanimously agreed.
I don't know if it was unanimously agreed.
And I mean, it is. I mean, and no fisheries producer organisation that I'm aware of has come out and recommended to their members that they shouldn't take it either. I very deliberately brought all key stakeholders together to advise me, two fronts: how we respond to the impact of Brexit in relation to quota challenge, and secondly, in relation to how we fight our battle at European level on both fronts. And I've stepped out the advice in relation to how we combine our collective perspectives and capacities to fight the battle at European level, by also, subsequent to that, bringing people together in relation to advising me on the Common Fisheries Policy Review Group, how we can put strategies together to strengthen or maximise our position there. So listen, that's the recommendation that came from the Sea Fisheries Task Force.
And so that's where you base that the fishing groups are all on board with the decommission and that there.
That was. I mean, there was a number of different schemes. The tie-up scheme again came from the task force, the decommissioning scheme, the processing scheme, the blue economy scheme. They all came from that task force. And again, that was very much, and I've sought to follow through on all of those schemes. Now, no more than myself, I'm sure every organisation would be of the view that, listen, we prefer not to decommission. We'd all prefer that if we could source more fish and get more fish. And that's absolutely fair. I think we would all share that. But the task force recommended very clearly to me that the decommissioning, and again, every organisation has, no organisation has recommended to its members that it shouldn't consider it. I think it's a reluctant response from all of us that we require as necessary, is regarded as necessary to respond to the post-Brexit situation. And listen, we were the first to do it, and listen, I mean, we've seen other countries launch decommissioning schemes since to respond to the Brexit impact on them as well.
Just a final question, just if I could. Just one of the last questions, just in relation to the task force report and stuff like that there in the review of the Common Fisheries Policy. I mean, do you think the task force report is strong enough and puts you in a good position in terms of negotiating a position in the Common Fisheries Policy review?
I think it certainly strengthens our position. It means that as an industry and as a sector and as a country that we are together in relation to the way that we move forward. I've very much been informed at all stages by working with the sector and their views and perspectives. When I go to Brussels now, the EU Council meeting will be happening, start at 9 a.m. on Sunday. We'll run all day Sunday, run all day Monday, probably run overnight Monday into Tuesday morning. I'll be meeting with the sector when I arrive again in Brussels, those that are there in Brussels, and also remotely, including those from home, again, and I'll keep them up to speed with how negotiations are going in this, but likewise now in relation to putting ourselves in the best possible position to deal with the Common Fisheries Policy Review, have worked with them too. Doesn't mean, listen, every other country will have a different view and perspective from us, and everybody will be battling and looking to retain their situation and improve it if they can. So it doesn't mean it's easy, but I certainly think in terms of working together, it's the strongest way for us to commence that battle.
Okay, thanks.
Two short questions now, Deputy Collins and Deputy McLaughlin. Deputy Collins first, briefly.
Very short, just two things. The fuel subsidy, and you've been asked about fuel subsidy, Minister said you can't apply it here. How is the French government can and have been doing that? And Irish trawlers have been getting it over in France that go over and fish there. Surely we're all under the one European umbrella, and that should, what's good for them should be surely good for our fishermen here who are seriously struggling with massive costs, and they don't come in under the fuel subsidy schemes, for electricity usage, even though they're using massive amounts of power. Minister, I appreciate that. And also about the piers, and there's mentioned there will go on piers like Scull got 123,000, Baltimore 139, and Cork Macsherry 154, which is greatly welcome. There's 250 piers under the Cork County Council, but the working piers that need very serious investment, like, and you might have any update on that, like a breakwater is needed in Baltimore, and it's in an SAC area, and it needs a lot of concentration maybe from the department to make sure that something happens there. Even your own councillor, Joe Carroll, Fianna Fáil councillor, asked me last week to make sure that this is brought up on the Dáil, which I am, and the weighing issue in Baltimore too, for the weighing of fish. It's a serious issue that trawlers that come in there, and we were down there only a couple of weeks ago, a hugely successful launch of Sheehy's massive trawler there, which I congratulate him, and an investment in a very difficult time. And just the Keelbeg Pier in Union Hall also, they're working fishing piers. You've been down in Union Hall yourself. They need real investment, Minister, and they're crying out for that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Minister.
So listen, in relation to the piers and harbours, so the investment that announced between today and earlier on the year, normally you have €3 or €4 million a year total investment in local authority piers and harbours. Over this year, that's in 1 year, over this year, the total, taking into account what I've announced today, amounts to €56 million. So absolutely multiple, and also a significant decision I made today in relation to the what normally was 80%, I think, isn't the normal local, 75, is it? It was 80. Normally that local authority is 75% from the government, 25% from the local authority. I've brought that to 95% from the government, 5% from the local authority. So for that investment of over €6 million in Cork, that I announced, 5% of that, or 300,000, will be what it costs Cork County Council to achieve that 6 million. I didn't forget Donegal either, no. So listen, I mean, and this is, so I'm not sure if that particular, I don't think that particular one was applied for by Cork County Council, but I know, listen, Deputy Host Christopher Sullivan is constantly in touch with me and was advocating on all of these piers, and was delighted to be able to deliver on them. I've no doubt whenever you're talking to the Taoiseach now next in relation to Cork and the government delivery in Cork, you'll be able to include the 6 million that's coming from the government to deliver here, Deputy Collins. And listen, I know he's launched their boat in Baltimore there recently, and was glad to get an invitation from them to be able to attend, and unfortunately wasn't able to that particular weekend. But I wish Ronan and all the family well. Again, Deputy O'Sullivan was in touch with me in relation to that, and I know it was a good day all around. In relation to the fuel, so listen, the French did a particular approach in relation to subsidising the fuel. To say the approach I took here was the second month tie-up scheme, and to make sure that those that were going out to fish were coming back with more fish on deck, and and were able to actually to address and help address the cost of the fuel as part of that. And as I said earlier on in response to Deputy O'Sullivan, I'm continuing to engage now at government level to see what we can do and if there is potential and looking forward. Now, things have improved somewhat, thankfully. Whenever prior to the Ukraine invasion in the middle of February, earlier this year, marine gas oil, in terms of its international price, was going at 67 cents a litre. That peaked then in June at €1.11 a litre. So it was 67 a litre just prior to invasion, and marine gas oil then peaked in June at €1.11 a litre. Last week it was down to 68 cents a litre. This week the international benchmark is at 71 cents a litre. It costs a lot more if you're buying it in Greencastle or Castletown Bear than what that benchmark is, there's a bigger differential now between what the international benchmark was and what the retail price was, but it has eased somewhat. But I'm conscious that this is something that hasn't gone away, and we don't know what the next number of months is going to hold, and I am considering the situation and engaging with regard to what could be possible.
So just one quick question from the doctor.
Yeah, I'd given way earlier on just because I thought we had more time. But in terms of the fuel issue, I mean, in all the submissions from the producer organisations, and remember that if you're inshore, you couldn't avail of a tie-up scheme, so they got no support at all. But the tie-up scheme is funded by the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund. And there's been no contribution from the Exchequer at all to help our industry, and they've already taken the hit, as you've said, in the prices up to now. I just think there's a need for some type of, I just don't think, I know, and I don't know what, I've appealed for you to do it so many times. I'm not going to take too much more time here this evening. I don't ask you to respond. You've already responded to Deputy Collins. I can't understand it. In terms of the 60 million allocated for the decommissioning scheme, will this be enough for the 64 vessels that have applied? Are you satisfied that that amount will be enough to cover the 64 that have applied?
Yeah, I think our assessment is that it is likely to meet the demand, Deputy, yeah.
Okay, a final question, and very, very brief one, is I've talked about the concerns, profound concerns around the issues of mackerel in terms of particularly Norway, Faroes, Iceland, within their waters, and that with no relationship to ISIS, and that this issue is dragged on. And you know the concerns of our industry about that. You know the concerns of our industry about blue whiting. I acknowledge you have been engaging with them, but as we speak now, Minister, I'm not exaggerating. They tell me that if these two issues aren't resolved in a fair way, that will be the final nail in the coffin for much of our industry. That's how serious this is. So I want to appeal to you, Minister, to keep the lines of communication with all the producer organisations open. I know they're out there right now, a number of them, as we speak, and out in Brussels, I should say. They have engaged with the Commissioner, as you know, and they're doing their best to make the case in the best interest for our country. So can I ask that whatever position you're taking in negotiations is aligned to what they're asking, and they're absolutely sincere in terms of what's needed for our industry. So that's the most important question I can ask tonight. That's, sorry, just Minister's just taking some advice. No, that's okay, Minister, it's no problem. But just, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Beamish, sorry. So I just no, that's no problem. In fairness, but obviously, Mr. Beamish is key to the negotiations. But it's critically important that on both issues that we are aligned to the position of the industry. That we understand how serious this is, and we get the fair share with a full mind to the fact there was not a fair treatment after Brexit, and that's and the feedback that our industry is getting is that. A number of the other countries are apparently there's support for our position and sympathy for our position, but I would just appeal that you would be in constant dialogue with our industry, with our producer organisations, particularly those that are most concerned around pelagic, but particularly the four large ones. On an ongoing basis, I would almost argue on a daily basis. Certainly, your senior officials will be talking to them on a daily basis, updating them, and doing everything we can to get this right. That's all I would appeal, Minister.
And I can assure you, Deputy McLaughlin, I am and I will be. As I say, I met them for about 3 hours 10 days ago. I'll be meeting them as soon as I land in Brussels and keeping them up to speed. We have a team, representatives in Brussels as it stands right now in terms of negotiations are ongoing, and they are in close contact with them as well, and will remain so. We are very much aligned. We have absolutely the same objective. My only objective here is to get the best possible outcome and get as much fish as we possibly can for our fishers to fish next year. And to battle at European level and all of and get the best outcome as possible, and all the various moving parts that are happening as part of those negotiations for that, and to take pool intelligence and pool experience in relation to how we best do that. And I know the industry will be engaging with their counterparts. The industry's counterparts in other countries are pushing for a larger transfer, a number of them, a larger transfer of blue whiting quota, which is not what we want. And obviously there's a role for industry there in relation to their industry colleagues to battle and try and influence what is coming forward from other industry representatives at European level in the same way as I will be at political level. Now, overall, as I say, in relation to blue whiting, thankfully the ICE's advice, the scientific advice for next year, is that is for it to be an 81% increase in allowable catch. So there's going to be a very significant increase in blue whiting catch next year. But we're going to need that, and we want to minimise the transfer. And as I say, over the last 2 years, I have succeeded in getting the transfer reduced, and it was a good outcome, and we actually made gains. It's a new game. It's a new 90 minutes. It's a new battle, a new engagement. There's no guarantee it'll be the same, but I certainly will be working right alongside our industry to try and get the best outcome and to try and ensure that happens. But we shall see how it evolves. Okay. I'd just like to thank the Minister and his officials for coming in this evening, and I know the Minister has another engagement, so I'd like to thank the Minister. We'll now suspend the meeting, and obviously he's supporting staff. We will now suspend the meeting till our witnesses enter for the second session. Thank you. Okay. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention: witness giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence to give to a committee. This means that witnesses full defence and any defamation action granting said a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from a location outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity of legal proceedings
as witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice in this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to publication by you outside the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. I'd like to welcome all the witnesses this evening, joining here with us or joining remotely. Mr. Sean O'Donoghue, CEO, Killybegs Fishermen's Organisation. Mr. Kieran Doherty, Chairman, Killybegs Fishermen's Organisation. Mr. John Lynn, CEO, Irish South East Fish Producers Organisation. Mr. Aidan O'Donnell, CEO, Irish Fish Producers Organisation, joining remotely. Mr. Patrick Murphy, CEO, Irish South West Fish Producers Organisation. Mr. John O'Sullivan, as above, joining remotely. Mr. John Tanton, Irish South West Fish Producers Organisation, joining remotely. Mr. Jerry Earley, Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation, also joining remotely. We left all the organisations making an opening. We'll take your opening statement as read, but we allow you to make observations at the start and outline your position and as regards fish quotas and decommissioning, and then we'll have questions from the members. So we'll give you 5 minutes each, and 5 minutes to each organisation. So we'll start with the Killybegs Fishermen's Organisation. Mr. O'Donoghue, is it? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for inviting us to this, which is a very important subject for us, which is the tax and quotas for next year, and indeed the decommissioning. I've already submitted a full statement, as you said, so I hope the deputies had a chance to read it. So I will just pick out a few key points from it. I think the first thing is that we are again in this ridiculous position in going into 2023 that we were in 2021 and 2022, that the Fisheries Council, to put it mildly, is of little use in terms of setting the final tax and quotas, as Brexit has changed everything, and the EU-UK negotiations are ongoing at the moment. They're scheduled to be finished on Friday, but from what we learn, I doubt if it will happen. The Council starts on Sunday and Monday, so we're going to have this farce again, in our view, of provisional quotas being set. We've brought this up over the last 2 years, and there needs to be a better way of doing business, because Brexit has changed everything. I think the other thing that we're in a backdrop that we have a fuel crisis, and we have reductions in quotas, and we have the huge effect of Brexit hitting us. So we really do need your assistance here in trying to get this through a very turbulent period for us. As an organisation, we've put forward, we've obviously identified the key problems, but more importantly, we've put forward solutions. And we do hope that some of those will be taken on board this year as such. And the first issue really that I want to address is the mackerel issue. And we have this ridiculous situation that Faroes and Iceland in 2021 and 2022 set themselves enormous additional quotas over and above what they should do, putting the stock in jeopardy. And there seems to be a total unwillingness at Commission level to deal with this. We looked for sanctions against trade sanctions against Faroes and Norway as such, and that hasn't happened. And if that doesn't happen, there's a real danger that our key stock will be put in jeopardy as such. There are a few other stocks that I want to highlight. We're facing a really difficult scene on the pelagic end of things for next year, because we have the Brexit effect in our mackerel, and we're both in 2021 and 2022. When you combine them together, we've transferred 23,000 tonnes. Think about it, 23,000 tonnes of mackerel worth 35 million to the UK. We're going to do the same next year, the year after, and the year after that, increasing up to, we'll be probably transferring by 2025, 20,000 tonnes of mackerel, and that will stay there indefinitely. So this needs to be addressed, and there is a small chink in the armour in terms of burden sharing with the Danish-Norwegian mackerel that I think the Minister, if I briefly heard him mention, he's coming up at the Council, and we expect that we will get our fair share of that, which will go in a small way, and I emphasise the word small, a small way towards the burden sharing, but by no means the full way towards the burden sharing. The other big issue that we have with pelagic stocks is our western horse mackerel, which is a key fishery for our pelagic vessels. The scientific advice for that for next year, unfortunately, is for a zero catch. We're going to end up with probably a rebuilding plan that was devised by the Pelagic Advisory Council of about 15 or 16,000 tonnes, which is about 3/4 of what it normally would be. But the key issue for us is that there's a big problem with the science here, and we want to get this benchmarked next year so that we don't end up with the same position for 2024. Blue whiting is the only good news story on the pelagic side with the 81% increase. But the issue there is the EU-Norway negotiations that are ongoing, and I've been there at them for the last 2 rounds. I should be there today, but I decided this committee was really important to be at, and we do need the balance reduced here, and more importantly, the access, the new access to the Irish box. If there is to be access, there has to be a payment in blue whiting in return from Norway as such. On the whitefish end of things, we have a difficult position in the northwest with a significant reduction in monkfish, and we'll likely not get the increase in haddock that we should get. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Can you just one second? Just in conclusion, I want to emphasise that the task force recommendations have been accepted by the Minister, and that 433 million, but not 1 cent has gone to the sector that has been most affected, which is the pelagic sector, and that has to be rectified without delay as such. Thanks.
Sean. Is it John or Patrick is speaking in South West? Which is it, John Lynch, or is it 2 Patrick? Or is, yeah. John?
The certain Irish South and East Fish Producers Organisation. Yeah.
5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Again, we sent in a fairly detailed statement, opening statement, and we went down through all the stocks that are of concern for us for this year. We also detailed some of the pelagic stocks, which we fully support the Irish position on those pelagic stocks, and recognise what we did lose in Brexit. But we also lost in the demersal stocks, and it's in the statement in Brexit. And one in particular is our second most valuable stock, but in some ways it's probably our most important stock in terms of the number of vessels and the number of crew that depend on it, and that's the nephrops. And as I explained in the statement, we lost 14% of our nephrops quota in the Brexit TCA agreement, and we have yet to get any quota balancing there. So the NEFROP's fleet is at a minus, and this has led a lot of drove a lot of the applications for the decommissioning scheme because of the reduction in earnings for the vessels, which is in demersal terms over 10 million a year each year since the TCA. Well, it's building to 10 million in 2026. Yeah, and those losses are unsustainable, and that is why vessels were forced to apply for the decommissioning scheme, which we think they shouldn't have had to apply for if we had burden sharing within the EU on the TCA agreement. Another serious effect of the TCA agreement for our members was in they're not affected by quota, but they are affected by the TCA agreement, and that was our scallop vessels, and they have yet to receive any assistance from the bar funding for the losses they have suffered due to the TCA, and they are struggling very much nowadays as well, like everyone else, in terms of fuel and the ongoing costs of the way they had to change their business due to the TCA, where they couldn't trade through the UK anymore because of the requirement for health certificates. We have outlined other stocks of concern, and we led into this year and leading into 2023, where we're going to have a review of the common fisheries policy. And we outlined in our statement, if the deputies have read through it, we've outlined very clearly our opinions on those stocks of concern. We have some of our main concerns is monkfish and black sole in Area 7, particularly in F&G sole, where we only have 3% of that TAC in the European Union. 3%. It's a very, very small amount for a coastal state in that area, and we have vessels that very much rely on this. We can't understand why we have so little, and we can't understand why we don't invoke. We have a Hague preference on this stock, and we don't invoke it, and we think that it should be that Hague preference should be invoked this year, along with the other Hague preferences that are invoked every year. We also were looking for, and it was a TAC on spur dog, which we haven't had since 2009, and I think in the provisional, I see in the provisional tax and quotas yesterday that there will be a TAC for spur dog, provisional TAC for spur dog in the first 3 months if there's no agreement with the UK by Friday. We would emphasise the need for we encourage the fish to move our fisheries in all stocks to a maximum sustainable yield over a time period. It's by 2030, but you know, in doing that, we need to recognise that some stocks are at such a low level that they are given a zero TAC advice by ICES each year, and where efforts are being made to rebuild these stocks, we still require a bycatch quota for these stocks to keep other fisheries open. In other words, you can't catch a lot of our target species in the demersal sector, like nephrops and haddock and whiting, without catching some cod. So we do require a bycatch quota there. Similarly for whiting in some areas where there's a zero TAC advice, you can't target your other fisheries without accidentally catching some of these species. And we'd encourage that bycatch quotas would continue there. I think that's it now, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. O'Donnell, you're in remotely. 5 minutes, sir, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm with the Irish Fish Producers Organisation, and I represent vessels on the East Coast and all around the coast in pelagics and in demersals. I won't cover the issues that have been covered by the other two participants. I think they've covered them very well. I just want to focus on one or two key issues that are really important to the seafood sector and in the context of the negotiations. At the moment, we have a situation, particularly for the Norwegians, where they're abusing the quotas on mackerel, for example, setting unilateral quotas for the last 3 years. And at the same time, as a third country, they're pressing for access to Irish waters to fish a massive quota of blue whiting, worth 100 to 120 million. Most of this will be taken in our waters. This is a major ambition of theirs. It's fundamental to them and it's fundamental to the overall negotiations. And to put it in perspective, the Irish boats will have probably the value of between 9 and 12 million. Almost 10 times, the Norwegians have almost 10 times the quota that we have, and yet the fish are in our waters. So what I'm really asking for, as part of a Brexit mitigation strategy, and remember that Brexit really hit the industry. We're decommissioning 60 vessels at the moment. In Rossaville alone, there's 9, 7 of which have applied for decommissioning. It's decimating the fleet. It's decimating the industry. And we have a golden opportunity here to take issue with Norway, to say you cannot access our waters south of 56 degrees 30 unless you're prepared to compensate our fishermen by way of quota transfers. It's up to us as a member state to stand firm, to set the ambition, defend the sector, and get something in return, get something that's reciprocal, because if we allow a third country to access our waters to fish in our territory on the third consecutive year, then we've set a terrible precedent. So what we're asking for is a level playing field. We're also, for next year, it's really important that we need to focus on a developmental approach for the sector, one that's coherent. We need a level playing field. We need to apply the funding that's there, for example, as the aid measures for the fuel crisis. That's to enable us to compete on a level playing field with Europe. And we are at an inflection point for the industry. There is a problem. We're suffering from decades of neglect. There's a failure of policy. The solution starts at home. But we need to prioritise, we need to raise the ambition, and we need to fight for these quotas. What fishermen need to survive are quotas that support the vessels. We cannot have resilience of vessels unless we have adequate quotas to cover our very small fleet. So that's basically my position. It's more about trying to raise the ambition and to encourage Ireland at a political level, at a whole of government level, and at a policy level with our civil servants to start to fight hand in glove to defend the industry and to set targets that support the development. In terms of development for the fleet, I know it's not relevant directly to the quota negotiations, but it is relevant to decommissioning. We are decommissioning a big segment of our fleet. We need also, alongside that decommissioning, to have a developmental approach where we're into a fleet renewal to address the issues of green compliance, decarbonisation, and improved technical measures. So thank you very much for your time. I hope I've not been too critical, but I think they are very, very important points. And as I say, it is an inflection point. The industry's at its lowest level. Brexit has whacked us. We've given away 40% of the total transfers of our fish to the UK. We've got nothing in return. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Mr. Murphy, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. You're blessed today. There's more than myself. I have 2 chairmen as well that might share the time with me, if that's okay. I'll start off. So, Chair, thanks very much to the committee for bringing us here. We'd like to see more of you, more regular during the year. This isn't just a one occasion when it comes to the December Council. I'd hope you take note of that. We definitely have a big job ahead of us, and we could do with your help. And we'd like to see more of this engagement between yourselves and the Minister. As he said in his address, he's met us a few times, and it's never enough. We've met the Minister a few times now on the fuel issue, and he's still considering it. And for us, that's on top of everything else that the industry is going through, is something hard to take. There is money there, it's available. Our industry right across the seafood sector is in dire need of assistance. We talk about level playing pitches and that we go to Europe to look for these level playing pitches. And here's one instance where we see countries in Europe getting fuel subsidies, which gives them a massive advantage in the marketplace because they have, of course, less expenses for them to catch the fish. We saw where the European Union again rolled over access to our waters between 6 and 12 miles, even though we objected to it, even though the Minister put a solid proposal forward that we'd protect the area and the spawning grounds by moving this area out to 20 miles. He was overruled with content of voting, and we find that is something that needs to be addressed in the European Union, and maybe the Minister needs help with that from yourselves and the Oireachtas, and even our Taoiseach for us should be doing that. We've been here last year, and one of the main points that we brought to the table here was that the review of the common fishery policy. We put together a task force, we put an excellent document together, and we were told by the Commissioner that there was going to be a review. Now it's a report, it's back to a review. Without a review of the common fishery policy, we'll be having the same conversations with you year in, year out, and it'll be about the industry shrinking, losing people inside the industry, and no future in it for the future generations of Irish men and women around the coastline. To put that in context, you've seen in the document we've provided, there was 330 boats in the categories fishing offshore in 2006. We think that'll be down to 120, maybe even less, if the targets are met. And to us, that's a shocking, shocking reality for our coastal communities in places where I grew up, where fishing is becoming a memory. There's no boats there. They're disappearing right in front of our eyes, and we're doing everything that we can to try and stem this. So again, burden sharing is something we spoke about last year. My colleagues have outlined quite clearly. We're fighting this, and we're trying to get our own colleagues in Europe to back us on this, and hopefully we will get some support from them. We see a real good story, which is atypical workers, where we have been asking for the creation of the last scheme to change it, to adapt it, to look after these hard-working people that are travelling from the other side of the continent, to create employment, jobs themselves ashore by their endeavours, ensure that there's well-crewed boats, good skill levels going out there, and we're delighted that there has been movement, and hopefully before next year this will happen. We have a small share, you can see, as John has said, in fisheries. It's very hard to see as well that the science, I brought the science book with me, where we are told the maximal sustainable yield, say for hake, for instance, is 81,000, yet on a precautionary level, we're given around 45,000, and our share in that is very, very minuscule. It's really tiny, 2,383 tonnes last year. If we get a 3% increase in that, it's really an insult to the fishermen that have done so much work, as you can see, by their bringing in gears to avoid fish. That's the design of fishing nets now, is to avoid fish. Fuel aid, I brought that up. Definitely it's something that we would be hoping you would again raise with the Minister. And this is on the backdrop that people were expecting to get fuel aid like the other countries, and they have dug deep holes now for themselves, and they're in serious trouble, and it will jeopardise their industries going forward. We were called the custodians of the sea when we stood up to the Russians and protected our seas. We're hoping that that will be acknowledged, and we too will be protected and helped to stay fishing. We have vulnerable marine ecosystems underwater. We have spoken to the Commission about this, closing off areas that were traditionally fishing grounds, and the objections that we have that this is going to really impact once again on individuals outside in the likes of the Porcupine, where they apply their living, again where we were deemed as custodians of the sea by protecting it from other people coming into it. So Chair, if I have a minute or two left for my colleagues. 41 seconds. Sorry about that.
Who are you looking for? Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
We do. Work away, John.
Yes. Thank you for allowing us to talk here. The first and foremost thing I say is the bluefin tuna quota, which we don't even have a quota on it. We have only a 1% bycatch. The Koreans and the Japanese are a big fleet out there outside our 200 miles. And how much they are catching, we don't know. There's no one controlling them. And our waters are actually full of bluefin tuna feeding on our stocks, and we're fattening them up for them. And Ireland has no quota. We should have asked for a quota back in 1997, 98, and we didn't. We had a boat long lining out of Castleton Bear, fishing tuna, bluefin tuna, sending the fish out to Japan. We had drift net fishermen at the tuna at the time, the albacore, and we caught bluefin as well. But they never asked for a quota, and I think it's time that they have to ask for a quota because our waters are teeming with bluefin tuna. So if I could go from there now to the blue whiting. The blue whiting is another fiasco. We have only just over 3% of 1 million tons of bluefin, blue whiting. And to think that Norway at the moment catches over 200,000 tons in our waters. They were allowed to do that back since 2011, I think, or 14 was it? And now they want to access double that. And if we can get at least 80 or 100,000 tonne in return of blue whiting for this quota to keep our fleet alive, because as I am the chair of the Southwest, I represent pelagic boats in the polyvalent sector as well, which a new boat came last week, and I think there's 3 more coming to our fleet, and there's boats that were modified over the years, and we really need quota. We lost so much in the Brexit. It has a massive effect on us because we have only 13% of the mackerel quota between 27 boats. 50 boats have a mackerel quota, are allocated a mackerel quota every year. And the 27 of them have only 13% access to the mackerel. We have only 9% access to the blue whiting. And in that alone, and boats that fished in that fishery have long track record since 2004, now have to go into a lottery to get a quota every year. But the other pelagic segment don't. They get a quota every year for each boat. And I think it's crazy. How are we going to survive? How are the new boats coming in going to survive? Are we going to another decommissioning scheme in our fleet going forward? Yeah, new boats, how are they going to be paid for? You know, boats were ordered before Brexit happened. It's just crazy, like, and we worry a lot about our future because we must never forget, and I would ask the government to please look into the redistribution of pelagic quotas between the polyvalent sector and the RSW sector, because we need that extra bit to survive going forward, and we don't need to see any more boats.
Mr. Sullivan, we might try and come back to you there later on, okay? Yeah,
any more boats being decommissioned.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on. Our other man online is Mr. Early. You're online.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to thank Deputy McLaughlin for inviting us onto this meeting. I find it astounding that as the biggest PO, even though we're an inshore PO, Chair, that we had no notification on this meeting until yesterday. So I find that shameful and whoever's responsible should hold their heads in shame with that. My big issue, Chair, and I find it also astounding that nobody else has raised this in as far as decommissioning is concerned. Decommissioning is something that we, the Irish Islands, never agreed to. So for the minister to say it was unanimous is not true. We didn't agree with it, and many things within it we didn't agree with it. But through the task force, he said that he had full support, which is not true. But in the decommissioning, Chair, I want to point out something really, really important that's really viable today, actually. The minister announced 52 million, I think he said, has been put forward to local authorities for improvements locally in the western regions. Cork today was announced. But I ask, and I want it on record, who is going to fish from these piers? There is nobody young coming into the industry. We're talking about quotas and serving quota. There is nobody young coming into the sector. There is no forward thinking on how they can get in, access, new entrants. Everybody is getting we are paying fishermen to stop fishing. is there any forward thinking in how there should be tonnage and kilowatts set aside for new entrants rather than these older fishermen who are leaving the industry through decommissioning, buying up small boats, outpricing younger people who want to get into the industry, and then coming into areas that are being fished in shore waters, non-quota species, and putting extra pressure on these stocks. To me, it is, and we're talking about going out to negotiate with the European Commission and quotas. You know, charity begins at home, Chair, and I think it's shameful that nobody else has brought it up at this meeting, and I want it on record that unless we support new entrants into the sector, this whole conversation is null and void as far as I'm concerned. I have nothing else to add that anybody else has already said. I could go on forever and a day, but it's been covered. So that is my contribution, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Collins.
Thanks very much indeed, and Chairman, and I'd like to welcome all our organisations here before us today. We've had a session, and I hope that some of you tuned in with the Minister before your session, and I think it was told from too that we felt that maybe you should have come first and him after, or maybe the best thing is a debate around the table with all of us, because sometimes you root out the truth and you cut the jargon out. I have a number of questions, and I obviously others might want to, but I'd like to request maybe to start with some of these answers, if you don't mind. So I might take them down rather than I come in and give other deputies a chance. Bluefin tuna quota. Can anyone answer me why? And I've got a very good statement I made to the Minister there. Since the 1990s, we haven't applied for bluefin tuna quota. And why? Can anyone answer me as to why that has happened? The second question, the Minister made it very clear he's engaging with you. The way I felt from what he said very often is that the case? You might answer me. Fuel subsidy I raised with him, and I asked him the question if the French and others can give a fuel subsidy to their fishermen. He said he can't do it here. I can't understand. We're all in the one European umbrella. Europe works when it comes to taking our quota off us, but when it, and dividing it to other countries. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to giving us a little bit of a subsidy for the Irish fishermen, why can't? Have you any idea? Because he said you've met him several times as to why that hasn't happened. And also on the decommissioning, can there be a bit of movement made on decommissioning? Because as far as I know, and am I right here, is there a different criteria applying to boats decommissioning in other EU states than those being applied to our own fishermen? Is it true that fishing fleets in countries that were paid aid to temporarily cease fishing activity will not have to pay back this money when they're decommissioning their boats, as is required of the Irish fishermen who are also temporarily ceased fishing? In the conditions attached to the Irish tie-up scheme, were Irish fishermen notified that this money would have to be returned if you later applied to and were successful in accessing the decommissioning scheme? Do you agree money paid to compensate fishermen for loss of earnings should be returned? In my view, fishermen have they not lost enough under this government by its gifting away of 25% of the actual fish they are catching? And the Minister continuously admits that they've lost 15%. He's keeping 15% figure, that this is what's lost to the Irish fishing sector. I've heard 25%. Who's right and who's wrong here? And I suppose and another thing too is that he continues to tell us, and he did that here today. We tried to correct him, that he said that the task force were unanimous in their agreement for a decommissioning scheme. Is that the case? And are we wrong? And I just, I suppose, just saying the task force. Just maybe one or two other small things. In MEPs, are they engaging with you? Because there's a huge negotiations going on next week. It seems to be always just coming up to Christmas week. You're the lastminute.com, and sometimes frantic, like Brexit, frantic decisions are made and bad decisions are made in the last minute. So are the MEPs engaging with the fishermen organisation, putting in a foundation, and a clear foundation for, maybe a good news story coming out of Europe in the next week or so? As I say, why are negotiations last minute? Why aren't they taking place in Sean, you said it earlier on as well. So look, in fairness, if you need me to go back over some of these again, I will, but I'd appreciate maybe Patrick or others could answer the question.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Will I start with Sean O'Donovan? We've got Patrick.
Thanks, Deputy Collins. You have a lot of questions there, so
I respect that.
Sorry?
You'll be brief.
Yeah. I'm always brief, Chair.
I was thinking that one, yeah.
Just on the I'll just take the ones that and I know my colleagues will deal with the bluefin tuna and other things here. The fuel subsidy, we cannot understand as an industry why a scheme hasn't been introduced, and we are demanding at this stage that a scheme be introduced. The French, the Germans, the Swedes have even introduced schemes. So there is no impediment to the Minister in actually introducing a scheme. He's been given the go-ahead by the European Commission under the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund to do so last, I think on the 24th of March, he was given that go-ahead, and we're still waiting for. On the different decommissioning rates, there are different conditions, but my understanding, and I think I know most of the countries that are decommissioning, is that the one thing that is common across them, both in the French and the German and the Danish and the Dutch, is that they all have ended up with having to repay the temporary tie-up aid if they had it. But it is one thing to have it. I would doubt in the end, knowing how things operate, that some of these countries will end up paying it back, but that's it. The other question that you mentioned, Deputy, is about this 15%. This 15% is a misnomer, and sorry, the figure is correct, but it totally underestimates the real effect in Ireland. The two biggest stocks in Ireland that got hit here are mackerel, 26%, and nephrops at 14%. So because they are so important to the Irish industry, the cuts there are the ones that you need to look at. The overall 15% gives you a distorted picture in relation to it. And finally, on the MEPs, I think the one thing, the December Fisheries Council, because the Parliament has no role on setting tax and quotas, they can't get involved. It isn't called decision as such. But we do have relationships with the MEPs, but when it comes to tax and quotas, we concentrate on the ministers and the Commission. But I didn't answer all your questions, but Patrick, I'm sure can answer.
John, will I leave you in next, then I'll go to Patrick.
I'm going to leave the tuna for Patrick anyway, because that's his forte. So just clarity on one or two of the things there. I think Sean answered actually most of the questions. But just on the Brexit, on the 15% and the 25%, it's very important to point out, you know, there was an old thing in fishing, and it was don't count the fish, count the money. Yeah. So, and the year before Brexit, Ireland's wild caught fish was 180 million, and in the Brexit transfers, Ireland gave 43 million. So that's 25% in my book. So 43 million is what Ireland gave in the Brexit transfers. That's that one. On the engagement with the minister did actually, and I even put it in my statement that the minister did start the engagement earlier this year because of the way things go now with the negotiations with the UK. So that did start earlier, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to finish any earlier because the negotiations are difficult and ongoing, and looking like we're going to be on provisional tax again for the first 3 months, which is not ideal, but probably better than having another bad deal.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Murphy, you'll be brief.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Deputy Collins, for your question. So I brought some visual aids. These are the fact sheets that came out from the department on the amount of fish that we catch and the fish that we inside in our waters, and there's a big change to what we were being told. So like the 15%, I'll explain it very simply. We don't catch 100% of even what John said of the 180 million worth of fish. that is allowed to us. But I can guarantee you, as Sean and my colleague have said, both the nifrops and the mackerel are caught virtually to the 100%. So all the fish that we lost was, as John said, was the money fish. So when you break it down, it was more than 25%. What we also didn't take into account was the non-quota species, a very, very important fishery, which was rockall squid. And we don't have access to that now because we're not allowed in there. And that's a direct result of what happened with Brexit. We lost access there. And this goes from 5 million to 10 million. So you can see how fast this money ramps up. And as John said, in the scallop men, the fish that they lost. So on the bluefin tuna, we were told, Deputy, by previous ministers, that the price we would have to pay to swap out, it wouldn't be worth it, right? This is despite the facts that we produced actual documents, evidence of sales dockets. One of our members still has them, the original dockets of landing these fish. Derek Davis did a programme on bluefin tuna and the fishery that we had, and there was members from the department there saying this is fantastic, this is great, and yet we have no tuna. We have seen how other countries have used the change in migration patterns of these fish to sensibly ask for a quota because these fish are feeding off our native stocks, as my chairman has pointed out, and we would be entitled under that to get it. The problem is that ICAT say, well, Europe has your fish, it's up to you to go to your colleagues in Europe and look for a quota. We pointed out in our talks, we were at the ICAT meeting, where the movement of fish, such as big-eyed tuna, are going to have a massive problem for our fisheries because we don't have a quota for them, we're not allowed to land them, but yet we will catch them mixed in with the other fisheries, not targeted, they'll be mixed in, yet we'll be deemed to be IUU fishing because we don't have a quota for them. And we can't swap it out because we don't have a Mediterranean licence to land such fish. And this is what we are trying to regulate and fight for ourselves. And in fairness, this year, for the first time, our Minister has informed us that he is looking for a quota for tuna. And as my colleagues have said, this is crazy because this could choke fisheries. If we catch this fish, you're not allowed to go fishing for the other stocks that you have. In case you catch this, again, you'll be deemed as IUU quota. Back to some of the remarks that you made, Deputy, if that's okay, on the MEPs. Mick Wallace is the only MEP that has made any contact with me. I did meet Grace O'Sullivan in Ringaskiddy at an event of restoring our ocean lighthouse building. I was a speaker at this, as she was. I think I got 5 minutes with her, and I was shocked to learn after the meeting that she stepped down from the PESH committee. So we have no full-time representative on Europe's PESH committee, which I find absolutely incredible. The size of the waters and the importance, as we were saying, the custodians of the sea, the amount of fish that spawn and breed in our waters. We're talking about blue whiting, you know, like millions of tonnes. The catch is 1.39 million, but that's only a proportion of the biomass of the stock. Again, this is down. I brought the stock book with me today, and we have real concerns about the way that the advice is given. I was at a meeting the other day and I was told that the advice for hake was 83,000 tonnes. 83,000 tonnes. And then I had to challenge that and I said, no, that's not correct. And he said, oh no, that's the maximum sustainable yield, that's the advice we're given. Yet last year we got 44,000 tonnes. This year we're getting an increase of 13%, but a real increase of 3%, because it's knocking off 10% of what we took last year. And this doesn't even rebalance the fact that this stock has seen a benchmark and the biomass of the stock has been revised upwards 71%. 71% of an increase in the biomass, and we get a 13% increase where we had a 25% cut last year, and I think it was up to 20s from 2019 all the way through, and we've been absolutely savaged. I think there was, one last point. The article that Sean refers to, there's an actual article, Article 26.2, and it was put into legislation in the European Union to allow us to get our fuel aid. We met with the Commission and several different times, all of us, and they told us this is what they want, and I just want to explain it. They feel it's better to support boats to go fishing rather than get nothing out of it, seeing them tied to the pier wall and they're bringing in no fish, creating employment ashore. They want boats to go fishing, yet we can't get a subsidy for fuel to allow boats to go to sea to fish financially viably. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Chair, I hope that you will take the time to look at our presentation. Like last year, we put in pictures of boats of people that were spending hundreds of thousands of euros putting these boats out to sea safely. One of those boats in those pictures is going to be decommissioned, scrapped. And it's going to be undervalued. It's not going to get the money, I believe, that it's due, what it cost to buy that boat and put that boat in the water first. And that is why, like Jerry Early said, he didn't support, their organisation didn't support the decommissioning scheme. We acknowledged that because we couldn't get any fish, the books wouldn't match up, and it was inevitable there was going to be a decommissioning scheme. But we made sure as an organisation that it was put into the draft report that our organisation did not agree with the terms and conditions of the scheme, that it was flawed. And that's why we didn't support the decommissioning scheme as it was written. The principle of a decommissioning scheme, yes, because we were in desperation, and as John said, we have no choice. Boats have to get out. There's just not enough fish there after losing 25% one quarter.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Yeah, and we have your submission, and it's
Yes.
a really, really comprehensive submission. If I go back to online, Mr. O'Donnell, you might join into the meeting again if you could.
Thanks, Chair. I actually missed part of the question, but I think it's to do with the whole quota setting process and the delays around that. Essentially, in terms of the MEPs, we've had experience here in Brussels and we've come out here to meet with them. We've had good support from MEPs. We've Colin Markey with Fine Gael. He's actually a stand-in on the Fisheries Committee. He has actually joined us to represent us at the Fisheries Committee to raise issues that are important to us, particularly in relation to the Norwegian access issue, which is a real important issue for us nationally. We've also participated with the likes of Chris McManus. He's also brought a delegation from the industry out as part of getting to know people within the Commission. And I think it's really important for us to understand that from an Ireland Inc. point of view, the real decision-making when it comes to negotiating for quotas is with the Commission. We've got a team of 3 people or 4 that are negotiating for quotas on behalf of Europe and on behalf of Ireland. And a lot of this work is mandated by the Commission itself, happens behind closed doors, and there's all sorts of interests. So the industry representatives here, we work together, a lot of us, to try and improve the situation. We fight the good fight. But really the message that we have in relation to the quotas and the treatment of Ireland is that Europe sees Ireland in some ways as being a soft touch in terms of the way we've been hit in relation to Brexit. They realise that we've been really badly treated. They put the bar funding in place. It's a stopgap measure. It's actually downsizing the fleet. It hasn't actually been spent as it was intended. And so we really have to pick up the fight at home. Our minister, our government, our whole of government approach has to take the sector seriously. We have to go into Europe at Commission level and fight for our sector. If we don't have that united front, we're going to diminish and shrink further. And we've lost about 50% of our sector over the last 10 years. The Germans, for example, have 4 times the production capacity or the processing capacity of Ireland. They're 2.4 million. The Dutch, one Dutch company, its combined consolidated turnover is in excess of the total Irish turnover, including aquaculture. So we're losing out. We have the most productive waters in Europe. But if we don't get quotas, if we don't manage the access, we're in a downhill slide. So we need to lift our gallop collectively, and we need to get support at government level and at department level to fight the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Early, online.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what Ian said, our last contribution was that Yeah, we found from our angle as well that we get a lot of support from the MEPs, Chris O'Sullivan, Chris McManus, and also Colin Markey. So in that sense, we're quite satisfied with the cooperation from the MEPs. I have to say that. Just on the bluefin tuna and any hopeful quota that we might get, I just wanted on record as well that like it and possible spur dog, that it gets distributed fairly among the whole fleet, and that includes inshore boats as well, Chair. Nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Brindle.
Thanks, Chair. And just a few questions. A lot of it has been dealt with already and stuff like that there, but just in relation to, Sean, if I could just ask you, just in relation to the science for the horse mackerel and that there, what actually is the problems with it, and how do you see that being resolved? And then in relation to, I mean, Ireland is not looking for sanctions for any of the Norwegian stuff and that there, and I'm just wondering what your view is in relation to that as well. And just in John Lynch, in relation to the quota balancing of the Brexit impacts and stuff like that there, and the unutilised quota that is available in other member states, I'm just wondering how much of quota is unutilised, and how if you could point out where that is actually is, and just wondering in relation to Brexit, just what your views in general are in relation to how badly treated we have been in relation to it. And I think it's telling that it was a French negotiator, and the French industry came out quite well out of it. So I'm just wondering what your views overall are in relation to it. And he has said that we need to raise ambition, and I think that's true. We do need to raise ambition. And I'm just wondering in relation to that, you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that there was an excellent document. I'm just wondering, is that the review of the Common Fisheries Policy, that was excellent, what you view as in relation to that document in terms of actually negotiating as a negotiating position in terms of the CFP review, and whether we'll actually, if that document was fulfilled, could we get a good outcome out of it? And just as probably in relation to it all as well, just the Minister has stated that all the fishing groups looked for decommissioning and were happy with it, and you've outlined that your position in relation to that, but I mean that's the position that the government has taken in terms of what the fishing industry is saying and doing, and if they're going to Europe with that position, I mean it shows what value they place on the actual conversations that you have with them, and I'd be very worried in relation to that. I think a lot of our problems start in Ireland, and we have to get Ireland on board first of all before we can get the European Union to actually look in relation to looking after our industry. And just as well, if I could ask, just in relation to the fuel subsidy, the Minister continuously says that because there's no excise duty on our fuel for fishing vessels, therefore he can't introduce a fuel subsidy, which is, to my mind, is a nonsensical argument, and it obviously is an indication that he doesn't want to give money except give tax breaks. That's all he wants to do. And in relation to the Jerry, in relation to the small inshore fleet and that, they don't use marine fuel anyway. They're using petrol and stuff like that. They're for outboard engines and stuff like that. So surely the Minister and would be in the department would have it within their remit to be able to come up with a scheme that would actually subsidise fuel costs for the inshore fleet. And I'm just wondering what your idea is in relation to how that could work as well. Thanks.
We might go in reverse order this time round, just to complicate everything. Mr. Early, we might start you and work our way back.
Yeah, thank you. Just in relation to the last point that Deputy Pringle made, and I have to say that Deputy Pringle is a great advocate for inshore fishermen. Yeah, I heard the Minister in his submission that the price of fuel is 64 cents, 68 cents, 71 cents. That's diesel, which is not indicative, but as far as I'm aware, the price of petrol hasn't come down, and as Deputy Pringle alluded to, the inshore sector is mainly based on outboard engines that uses petrol. So yeah, I think there has to be looked into. how some concessions can be made on that. I suppose that's the only point I have to make on that, Chair. The rest of it is probably for our colleagues in the pelagic side and the commercial side. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Need. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thanks, Chair. I actually missed a little bit of what was being asked by Deputy Pringle, but I think it may have been to do with the Common Fisheries Policy Review in relation to myself. Basically, if it is, I mean, basically, we need to be really careful here about the Common Fisheries Policy Review. The reality is that it was a review of the functioning of the Common Fisheries Policy, a report on it, rather than a review. Industry got together. There was lots of very strong submissions made in relation to various things. Some of the key ones in terms of opportunities for the sector certainly revolved around tuna, bluefin tuna, albacore tuna, big eye tuna as a byproduct or a bycatch within our prod fishery. Also, the reality is that most of our member states are fishing very large volumes of fish in our water, such as nephrops, for example. They're not able to catch the volumes that are recommended scientifically. There's an opportunity there for the state to work with industry to put in place long-term swaps with the French or the Spanish for things like nephrops that are fished off our coast within scientifically recommended limits and to the benefit of Irish fishermen. But we need to have that sort of innovative thinking. The report is there, it's well prepared, it's well submitted, but the reality is they're not going to have a review of the entire policy. It's going to be a mere tweaking, and we need to be mindful of that.
I might ask Mr. Tarrant to come into the meeting. John, you might comment, if you could, from the Southwest Fishing, from your point of view. John, you're on mute. Yeah, you're still on.
Yeah.
You're with us. You're welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just on a small issue there, most of it is covered at this stage. Fairness and justice for the Irish fishing fleet and for the Irish fishing industry. And I'd just like to draw your attention here just to one species of fish alone, is black sole. Black sole in the Celtic Sea. The TAC for 2020 is 1,337 tonnes. Of that, Belgium have 59%, which is 780 tonnes. Ireland have 3%, that's 39 tonnes. Where is the justice in citing that for Irish fishermen? I'll draw your attention to another fish, the Northwest Waters hake, like Patrick said there, and that again is no submission, 44,000 tonnes. France have 19,966 tonnes, equals 45%. We have in Ireland 2,383 tonnes, which equals 5%. And we have England or UK with 8,831 tonnes, and Spain with 12,756 at 28%. So I just want to know, where is the justification in all these quotas? If you want to even talk about mugfish at 7%, we have 7% of it, and France have a whopping 56% of it. And I'd just like to have that noted, if you don't mind. And only one other thing is on the decommissioning scheme, as to why, because boats have agreed, for lack of fish and other reasons, to decommission their vessels, why should we have all of these good vessels broken up, where some of them could be used for offshore wind farms afterwards and guard duty work and stuff like that? Why should we punish the families if we don't have the fish? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. Mr. John Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and just go back to the question that Deputy Pringle addressed to myself, which was under the review of the Common Fisheries Policy and the utilisation of quota. And I suppose you could go through them all, but the three main ones that are underutilised, where Ireland is short on quota, is nephrops in 7, monk in 7, and 6, and hake in the wider area, 6, 7 and 8. Those quotas are underutilised mainly by France, who have a huge share of the TAC. Ireland has, in all three cases, a very tiny share, said 3%, 7%, and I think, well, in NEFROPS 30%, but in NEFROPS we run very close to the line every year, and it's only through good management that we end up with a few tonnes left over to transfer into the following year. So, with the underutilisation by the other member states, and one member state in particular, I think, as John Tatton referred to, I think that we could develop a better transfer or swapping mechanism that could work for Ireland. But all of these issues are very well dealt with in the final report of the Common Fishery Policy Review Group that the Minister appointed this year and reported to him in August. I think it was the final report. And all of the tools are there, all of the things we discussed, all of the things we've discussed here tonight in reference to the Common Fishery Policy, how we could achieve a better deal for Ireland is well pointed out in that document. And I think that the Minister and the Government should follow that document and apply it in their negotiations in Brussels to achieve a better deal in all the stocks. We've outlined here tonight, like the sole in F&G, where we've only 3% of a very valuable fishery. We're very short on this stock, and we don't invoke a hake preference that we have on that stock.
Okay. Chair, can I just ask John, just in relation to, I mean, currently, what agreements take place between Ireland and France in terms of the excess stock and stuff like that there that you've outlined?
We have no agreements, only that we do swaps. So we have to swap out some of our stocks to get in stocks that we are short of.
So the department doesn't do anything?
So we swap in NEFROPS and we swap in monk. So we have to swap out other species for that, like mackerel and skates and rays and whatever we have to swap out. You know, that we can afford to swap out.
So there's no current arrangements in relation to that?
Well, there's a swapping mechanism within the EU, which is run through the department. Right. That runs quite well. If we didn't have that, we'd be in a lot more difficult.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Kieran?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As you can see from all the people here speaking today online and around the table here, everything's negative, and everything that's been happening to our industry has been negative as regards the Brexit fallout. And it's coming home for the likes of us to see, because as well as being chair of the KFO, I speak for a lot of people in the KFO that I'm a fishing boat owner as well. And for the first time in 30 years I'm fishing. We haven't been fishing in the autumn time. And this is the reality of Brexit coming home. That we haven't retained our crew for this time of the year for the first time. My father was in charge before me, so that we've crew members on board for 40 years and they've had no employment. This is the reality of Brexit. And I noted last week that Ursula von der Leyen came into Ireland and she was in the Dáil. And I'm not taking away the European project has been good for Ireland, but I have to say here today as a fisherman, it has not been good for Ireland. And it hasn't been good historically, but more so it hasn't been good in the Brexit fallout. And I just would like to ask the question, did anybody from government approach Ursula von der Leyen to put across our disgust at what happened in the Brexit negotiations? Was any questions asked on would there be any burden sharing going forward? I would like to find out that, to see that anybody, because if it wasn't asked, it just goes to show where we are as an industry. So, because before the Brexit TCA was agreed in December 2020, the European Fishing Alliance had a red line issue that no matter what happened in the Brexit negotiations, every country would share the responsibility and share the burden equally. Now that didn't happen. Basically, we were thrown under the bus. So we have opportunities here for the European Union to redress that, whether it could be through the blue whiting that other members have spoke about here today. Because let's not forget, out of that 1.3 million tonnes that will be caught next year, that stock spawns in Irish waters. Ireland, under relative stability, we could be looking at, what, 50,000 tonnes of it. So Ireland gets 50,000 tonnes out of 1.3 million tonnes. and there'll be countries that this fish never swims in their waters. It'll be getting far more quota than us. Now, there's something far wrong with the whole project as regards Europe, when that's the way we're being dealt with. The other most valuable stock in the North Atlantic, the most valuable stock in the North Atlantic is mackerel. And here we are giving away 21,000 tonne, and you have the likes of Denmark giving away 280 tonne. 280 tonne versus 21,000 tonne. Where is the fairness of the level playing field in that? It's non-existent. And what's been done about it? Hopefully there'll be small bit of good news next week, but it will be small. And as an industry, I feel like we're not a fishing industry, we're a firefighting industry. Because all we seem to be doing is trying to tame down the bad news that's coming. And there's never seemed to be any good news, and any wee bit we get, it takes a lot of fighting on behalf of the industry. And the other one that's going on in the North Atlantic as we speak. They're still fishing it. The 55% overfishing of the mackerel by the Norwegians have been fishing it since June. And here we are in the month of December, and they're still targeting it, trying to catch it, to show that they can catch it in their waters. I mean, it's disgraceful. We talk about MSY. The Minister spoke earlier about MSY, maximum sustainable yield. Yet in all, most of the pelagic fleet in Ireland, my vessel has been tied up since the beginning of April. It won't go to fish till January. That's going to be the trend from now on unless something changes dramatically. So we're fishing 3 months of the year and tied at the quayside for 9 months of the year. And that costs money as well to be tied at the pier. You have to keep your engines running, etc. So while we're tied for 9 months of the year, every other nation is having a Klondike. We used to hear about the gold rush in America. There's actually a mackerel rush and blue whiting rush in the North Atlantic, and nobody's speaking about it. They're not speaking to the right people to stop it. And as regards the European Union, they are sitting on their hands as far as I'm concerned. They are not doing the job against these coastal states. They're not using the tools and the mechanisms that they could use to stop these nations. They can very easily come in here and lay down regulations to us that we have to adhere to. But they don't seem to do any of the same to these nations in the North Atlantic. And it is a gold rush that's going on in the North Atlantic. I mean, the amount of mackerel that's been taken, and let's not forget 12 years ago some of these countries had zero entitlement to this mackerel. There's been a smash and grab going on. And not alone were they not satisfied with that, what they were taking up until 2 years ago, but now they've doubled it. And the result of that will be, there'll be quota cuts coming down the line on the backs of scientific advice. And who's going to be the losers? Ireland will be. Okay. We are the biggest losers out of everything that's coming out of what their behaviour is doing. So I'd just like to put that on the record to the deputies and to the chair.
Yeah, I have to say it was very damning testimony there from Kieran. In the submission I'm going to ask questions to each one of you, if you don't mind, so I'll just have specific questions for each one. But the first question would be for Sean and Kieran from the Killybegs Fishermen's Organisation. In page 3 of your submission, Sean, you state, and rightly state, that the proposals disregard those other objectives of the CFP dealing with economic, social and employment benefits and contributing to the availability of food supplies as stated in Article 2.1 of the Common Fisheries Policy. That's at the top of page 3. And I think that ties into what Kieran has said, that if you look at the approach in terms of mackerel, it is absolutely shocking in that Norway and the Faroes have been held to no account in terms of what they have done in their own waters, just unilaterally increased quota with no reference to science. And these are, in the case of Faroes, part of Denmark, and in the case of Norway, a major trading partner with the European Union, and no repercussions. And then they come back and they want access to the Irish box, Norway. I actually find it astonishing. So what I want to get a sense of from yourselves is, the question to yourselves would be, when the Minister was here, I appealed to him not just to meet, as he had done in September, but is there now going to be, constant communication with yourselves in terms of the critical negotiations? There's different, obviously there's a Fisheries Council, there's the negotiations with the Norwegians and Faroes around this issue of mackerel, and then I'll get to blue whiting in a moment. That question will be for E. But just want to get a sense of that, right? And do they accept that this is not in line with the best principles of the European Union, this approach? So just want to get a sense of that. Next question then would be for E. E, in your presentation, which was really sobering, on the third page, there's a table which is Eurostat data, and that table tells us that the total value of fish processing in Ireland in 2015 was 627 million. By 2020, before Brexit, the trade and cooperation agreement, it was down to 325 million. In other words, it halved. Okay. Now, the Minister, in response to me raising this, which is shocking, talked about maximum sustainable yields and fishing practices have changed across Europe and so on. But while looking at this table, I also see that Belgium has increased their sector by 40% in that five-year period. Finland has increased their sector by 70%. That's the value of their processing sector. So in the very same period, you have countries, Spain is up 20%, Poland's up 50%, France is up around 4%, Britain before Brexit was around the same. So in other words, the only people who've seen a huge decline, dramatic decline, was Ireland. So I just want to get a sense of that is the entirety of the value, as you understand it, of the processing sector for the country, and just to get your commentary on that, it's utterly depressing. And then the next question for yourself, is blue whiting. Same question I put to Sean and Kieran. Are the Minister, I'm not going to rehearse because I went through the Minister about the serious concerns of the industry, that this could be the death knell of the industry if they don't get this blue whiting negotiations and the others, horse mackerel and mackerel, right. But in terms of blue whiting, are you happy that there's constant dialogue with the Minister and his senior officials as we approach these critical negotiations? You've asked that they be deferred. Maybe you'd elaborate on that. Third question then is for Jerry of IMRO. Jerry, you'd mentioned spur dog there, and you've talked about in terms of the quota. This is a publicly owned quota in Ireland. I want you to just talk about the islands fishermen and the inshore fishermen, your vision for how you could get a sustainable share there, please, Jerry. And then finally, for John and Patrick, or whoever, Patrick and John from South and East and South and West. John, you talked about the Hague preferences, and again, your submission is very sobering. You've talked about deploying the Hague preferences if need be in terms of some of the species that you would need and then you also talked about some of the species there that the science, sorry, Patrick, was yourself actually said that. You talked about the science versus what was actually being offered wasn't in line with the science. It was far too conservative. So just to get a sense of, like, these are critical issues, for your industry. What's the level of dialogue with the department and the Minister on them? Is he listening? Is his officials listening? Do you get a sense that they're going in and looking for those matters specifically as you've raised them? And then finally, John and Patrick, just if you could comment on the fuel. I mean, I am in despair at this stage. I don't know how many times we have begged for an intervention on fuel, not from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund, which is a fund to compensate for the impact of Brexit. And I agree, Sean, with your point about the pelagic sector and not getting the assistance considering the scale of the impact. But we don't want it from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund and tie-ups. We want Exchequer. There's a huge package in the recent budget from the Exchequer for a whole range of sectors in the economy. How in God's earth is there not some intervention for your industry? Now, the Minister today started quoting the favourable price now for fuel that has come round again now. And my point is, if you're inshore, you didn't have a tie-up scheme anyway. but like there's a whole impact throughout the year. So I just want to get your sense, John and Patrick, on that. Apologies, I just wanted to direct the questions rather than everybody going over the same points. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll start with Ciara Shaw.
Thanks, thanks, Deputy McLaughlin, for that. Yeah, I'll fully address your socio-economic thing and the interaction as well. I think you rightly picked that out in our submission that every year, it isn't just this year, every year the Commission produces just the biological aspect of their TAC and quota proposals, and they are dependent on the fisheries ministers then picking up the socio-economic food security, which legally, in legal terms, is every bit as important as the biological. They all have to be taken together. I think the other thing that we did have, and I mentioned it at the very start of our submission, and I think it's really important to understand it, is that unfortunately now the December Fisheries Council is becoming, I won't say a total irrelevancy, but it is no longer the status that it had before. And the issues that matter now, there's about 6 different negotiations that go on, which by the time we reach the December Council, the ministers are only rubber stamping the idea. So the first of those is the coastal states, which covers mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandi herring. Then you have the EU UK negotiations, which are huge now for us. Then you have EU Norway UK, which is a trilateral. We have EU Norway, which is what we've been talking about in the balance, and there's a few other things around it. So far, out of those 4, the only one that has made decisions has been the coastal states on the TAC for mackerel, blue whiting and Atlanto-Scandi herring. We also have, on the tuna end of things, we also have the ICAT, the International Convention of Tunas. So, to be honest, the minister this year, certainly at our instigation, brought rather than which we'll be meeting the minister Saturday night or Sunday morning, whenever we meet. But basically everything is either done or just waiting to be done. So we can't change anything. So the negotiations here with the industry have to start in early September, because you need to be in advance of the negotiations. And I have found that COVID has been a problem for us, because most of us had to use Zooms and we couldn't be physically present in the locations. It makes a difference. This year, that is changing, and hopefully we can get a new scenario that we do get together to actually start our discussions on all of those elements, because they all fit in as part of the jigsaw. I just want to I know you didn't ask me the question, but I'm so annoyed about the fuel, and I know you are, Deputy, as well. This idea of it being tax and all that, that's a total to put a pun on it, that's a red herring. There is provision here for compensating for the additional costs. So you take what you were paying this time last year and compare it with this year, and you should get a subsidy related to that. That's what the others has done. Quite simple, and there's no reason we can't do it.
Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll refer back to Deputy McLaughlin first on the Hague preferences. We think that the Hague preference should be given a far better legal standing within the common fisheries policy, and that we shouldn't have to go to Brussels every year and renegotiate the Hague preferences time and time again. Everybody knows they're there. everybody knows that they apply to Ireland only now. They used to apply to Ireland and the UK, and actually with the UK leaving the European Union, Ireland has actually lost some percentages in their entitlement in the Hague preferences. A small amount, but a loss nonetheless, due to the UK leaving, because a lot of our Hague preference fish used to come from the UK. So that's how that happened. But we think that they should have a stronger legal standing within the common fishery policy and within the European Union, and that we should not have to go with the beg and bowl every year looking for the Hague preferences. I don't think that's fair. And then, as I referred to before, we have some Hague preferences that we do not invoke, and we think that we should invoke the one on sole F&G, because we're so desperate for that species in that area. We have vessels that are reliant on it, and they just don't have the fish to fish, and they have to stop fishing from time to time to allow for a quota for the next month to come on stream so they can go back to sea again. So it makes it very difficult for them. On the fuel crisis, as everyone has referred to it already tonight, but it's the same. You know, it's the money is there. We just need the will to get it distributed, and that's the fact. The money is in the MFAF funding, and the Commission gave the permission. They they invoked the Article 26(2) in the MFAF funding programme, and that allows some of that funding to be used as a fuel subsidy, which is very desperately needed by vessels at the moment. The European Commission estimate that the European fleet as a whole is viable at fuel costing 60 and 70 cents, which is what it was before the crisis. And anything above that is a problem for the fleet. It was way over €1. It has gone back a bit, but it is still only back in the late 80s and early 90s cent per litre to the vessels. So it is still a huge problem for the fleet in Ireland. And to say anything else is not true.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Murphy, you might work with your two other colleagues when you respond.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Deputy, for the questions. First of all, I hope this would be taken as maybe a lesson to others. I'm the first to put my hand up when I make a mistake or say something incorrect, so I'd like to correct the record. When Deputy Michael Collins asked me about our engagement with the MEPs, I said that we had very little. I thought that was in regards to the current negotiations, but we did have a very good trip to Brussels to meet with the Commission, and it was organised by Deputy McLaughlin and Chris McManus, and I thought it was very, very good, because at those meetings with the Commission we got to put across our point of views, and our understanding was that if we could come with a mechanism to alleviate the damage that was done to us in other means, then they would be receptive to this. And this is why we feel the blue whiting issue is critical. This is a coastal state. It's not within the European Union, and this is access to fish in European waters. Even if they say that this fish can only be counted as European fish and European waters, it's a coastal state accessing here, and we feel this is the opportunity where the European Union can rebalance the burden sharing here. If there's a will, there will be a way. As my colleagues have said, yes, there was legal changes to the MFAF on the regulation of 2021-1339, as Sean quite rightly said. We in industry, through our colleagues in Europe, met with the Commission, asked could they change the rules and the regulations to allow the member states to give out fuel aid, and that happened. And as they keep pointing out to us, that was done. It's up to us to go back to our member states and get them to give the fuel aid to us like they have in other countries. And I have a question for you, please, this committee. Can you please ask the Minister, what is the 5.5 million that hasn't been allocated from the MFAF funds going to be spent on? Because industry right across the sectors, as Jerry said, the inshore sector, the seafood sector, both the processing and aquaculture, and other boats did not avail of a tie-up scheme. They got no aid in this regard, yet they suffered from the fuel increases, and this needs to be addressed. And as I said in my earlier contribution, we have vessels that were counting on this. They genuinely are. They have massive fuel bills. They were hoping, like other countries, that this would go back, not just for the fuel going forward, but there'd be a rebate, like Sean said, and it's very, very easy to do this. You use the figures that you spent on fuel last year, you see what the increases were, and you go with the guidelines that were presented by the European Union, and that is 30% of the increase. So we're not asking for the full amount of the fuel increase to be covered, just a portion of it, just enough to allow boats to be viable going to fish, to go to sea, and that they can remain legal, targeting the stocks, the minimum stocks that they have to do so. It is crazy to be sending boats out, and anybody that's been on a vessel knows how difficult it is to make your living on the sea. It's not an easy environment. You're risking your life some of the time outside of weather conditions, and these people deserve to be treated a little bit better. Deputy, you did say about the science, and I'll give you one example. And it was mentioned earlier by Deputy Pringle, and that is horse mackerel. So 805,000 tonnes. I'm going to say that again so that it's not a mistake. 805,000 tonnes there is of that stock, according to the scientists, in biomass. And yet they feel there could not be a sustainable fishery created out of that. Now, I understand that the way that the European regulations are written, the biomass of the stock has gone down below BLIM, and it's set that it has to recover in a calendar year, otherwise it's a zero TAC advice. But because, as Sean has said, socio-economic should be applied to this, and it's not that the stock will be damaged further, because we know there's a massive egg recruitment, but if you phase the cuts. So the Pelagic Advisory Council and Sean, and I must mention him in this, did Trojan work in working with the scientists for 2 years, well before this problem was flagged by the industry, that this was coming down the tracks, and we must do something about it now. So 2 years of efforts, of meetings all over Europe with many different people to come up with a rebuilding plan, which is only 17,000 tonnes. And as I said myself at our meetings in front of the Pelagic Advisory Council, you can work out the percentage of what that is of the stock. This is just to make sure that we keep getting the science from this fishery, that the boats that are there have something to keep going on. It's not going to pay their bills, but it'll give them something so that if they do catch these with mixed in with other fisheries, they won't be accused of IUU fishing. And this is what we're asking for, a rebuilding plan of 17,000 tonnes. And for me, I find it incredible that the science doesn't back up that you can take 17,000 tonnes out of 805,000 tonnes, and that wouldn't do any damage to the stock. You might slow down the recruitment to bring it back up above BLIM for a couple of years, but the way fish spawn isn't one offspring, it's thousands of offsprings, and I think it's absolutely crazy if that amount of stock. So that highlights the point for me about the science. Again, the book here, and we'll go to, if you bear with me for a couple of minutes, Chairman, this will be explain it all really. This is the stock book that was produced by the Marine Institute. I'm sure the Minister was speaking about this. We have to follow the science.
You leave time for your other colleagues to get in.
Yes, just bear with me. So we are always accused of overfishing and everything else. So there's always 3 ranges. So you have the lower range of the advice is 53,284. You also have the MSY advice, which is 83,130. But the upper range, that if you just caught, if you could catch hake on their own, you could catch up to 117,526 tonnes of this stock, and you wouldn't damage the recruitment and the fish coming back in next year, according to the scientists. Yet, we will be told it'll be around 49,000 tonnes if we're lucky next year. And for me, that doesn't bring in the socio-economic part of the pillars of relative stability and the common fishery policy that we were told we must include in our deliberations, Deputy. I hope that explains it. Sorry for taking up too much of the time.
Mr. O'Sullivan, do you want to comment briefly? John? You're on mute there.
Yeah.
Perfect, John.
Yeah, I think very good contributions there from all of you, you know, especially about mackerel and what we should have and what we shouldn't have. We have a massive natural resource outside our door. We have the biggest, most productive waters now in the EU. You know, it's crazy like that we have such a small percentage of quotas, and it's the same hymn sheet all over and over again. And if people don't realise what sovereignty means, it means under unit class law, we should be entitled to fish up to 60–70% of the fish in our waters. Like, where is the justice? Where's our rights going forward? And it's time to wake up, because there's too many towns around Ireland, from Clogherhead all the way around to Greencastle, being decimated. And you can see it everywhere, like, you know, and it's about time it stopped, because it's a massive resource, food security going forward, everything, and I think we have to wake up. If we don't, it's a shame. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If I go to Mr. O'Donnell, please, online.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Deputy McLaughlin. I suppose I'll just talk about the 2 points that you've raised, Deputy. In relation to the Irish processing indication, the trend there that I've given from Eurostat, the reason I use that is because it's hard figures. It shows that we're in a very, very difficult and a very, very bad place. It merely confirms what we already know. All you've got to do is drive through the various fishing towns in Ireland on the west coast or the east coast, and you can see the decline and the demise of the catching sector and the processing sector. Vessels, first-class vessels of world-class standard, tied to the piers, when other member states are out processing and catching fish from our waters and to their own benefit. So this decline is evident. For example, in the south of Ireland now, there's only one pelagic company processing left, and that's an indication of the fact that there isn't sufficient supply of raw material. It's also important to point out that you mentioned Belgium. Belgium has a coastline of approximately 67 kilometres, yet their processing turnover is 300 million, almost 50% more than Ireland. It's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. And the other key indicator as well is that over a period of 10 years, the landings of Irish vessels into both Irish and foreign ports dropped by 33%. At the same time, the landing of foreign vessels into Irish ports increased. It went from up to 145%. So you can see a situation where we're losing the game ourselves, and foreign vessels are a very important source of supply for us. But in that context, and in the context of quotas and employment and the socio-economic piece, if we don't have a fit-for-purpose control procedure to get that fish landed properly and freshly and in the best condition, we will also displace that supply from processors. I'm not here to represent the processing sector, but it is an indication of a problem that we do have. In relation to the blue whiting, I suppose I'm relatively new in the position, but I just find it really difficult to understand, given that we have a quota of less than 3% of the total at the moment, and the Norwegians have almost 8 to 9 times that, most of it caught in our waters, why we would even think of giving them access to catch this fish without some form of deal. We have a very strong relationship with Norway over a very long period of time. But business is business, and we need to represent our sector effectively. In terms of the consultation, again, I'm relatively new to the representation sector, but all I'd say is that from what I observe, particularly with Norway, the negotiators are very effective, but the negotiators in Norway take the lead from the industry, whereas in Europe, all the member states in the negotiations are represented by 2 or 3 negotiators who take the lead from the Commission. And they think about things like oil and gas and the benefits to other member states. And some member states have a much better relationship with their industry than we have. The Dutch work hand in glove with our sector. They're really close. They develop it, and that's shown in the fact that the companies have increased and grown in scale and in scope and developed their business abroad. So I do think, and I'm genuine about this, that there needs to be a better level of engagement between industry and the public service and at political level to represent Ireland. Otherwise, it's going to be continued decline. We can fight the fight. We can come out here to Europe to see what's going on. But in principle, what they will say, you've got to use your own people in your own public service to represent your industry. That's my experience. And I think it's a very, very pointed situation that that's what we need to focus on if we're going to survive. We're here in the national interest. We're here to build the businesses. There's 16,000 people employed in the sector. But certainly after Brexit and with everything that's going on, that will reduce significantly. That's my view.
Mr. Early.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy. I suppose the first thing I'd want to do, Chair, is on the CFP. I forgot to include it in my submission, was that we have disengaged from the CFP because we feel that a lot of our proposals weren't included. So I don't think there's much there for the inshore and the small scale sector. So it's, you know, that's a shame. But on Deputy McLaughlin's question in relation to the spur dog, I think it's a great question, and I'd like to. I know that's been a pretty negative, as Kieran Doherty and the KFO said, it's been a pretty negative meeting. But I have to say, the one chink of light that I would see is that there's a possible tack coming down a spur dog. You know, we all, I suppose, remember back 15, 20, 30 years ago when every small harbour around the coast was really benefiting from the spur dog and the gillnet fishery. I remember when Sean Donoghue came out to the island here, and one of his roles at the time, I suppose, was to give the bad news to the fishermen here that because of its relation to the shark family, that it was spur dog was being banned and very unlikely that it would ever come back. So, I mean, there's a small chink of light there, Deputy, that we may get a quota back. And I think it's imperative that you know, for the small scale sector, I mean, it's been hammered, and I know that we're all on here and everybody has difficulties with quotas, and it's a difficult sector to be in at the moment. And, you know, we're all here representing our own little corners and you know, members, and it's hard for everybody to, because we're continuously seem to be knocking our head against the door, you know. But on this one, I feel that there's a chance maybe to regenerate some of these harbours that the Minister is very proud of, saying there's £56 million being spent on, or 65 or €56 million being spent on that. You know, how many harbours have got young people coming out of them, and many harbours have got a seasonal long fishery when it's not getting hammered into lobster and crab and nothing else. You know, we all know the benefits and the destruction the salmon closure had in our small areas. And, you know, I think this is an opportunity to maybe start to right the wrongs for us all, you know, not just the inshore sector. You know, I know there's a lot of good fishermen out there that are throwing spur dog out, you know, hand over foot. That's you know, the pelagic men will say the spur dog going in and causing all kinds of problems in the fish pumps and et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a small chink of light there, Deputy. And again, for the want of repeating myself, I think it's very important, if we do get a quota, that it's shared, that we all share we all share the pain, but also share the joys maybe of getting something back to our areas. So, yeah, listen, I suppose that's a positive in a sea of negativity. So, yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. Deputy, is he happy? Yeah. Okay. I suppose, look, we're literally over time by nearly 40 minutes at this stage, so I think we better try to wrap up if we possibly could. I just want to acknowledge everyone who participated here today. I know we came for excessive miles, to say at the very least, to represent your industry. Greatly appreciate it. I think it's been very, very good engagement. So it's more than I appreciate your attendance here today. The next meeting of the committee will take place, next public meeting will happen on Tuesday, the 13th December at 7 o'clock. The meeting will examine the forestry vision strategy. We'll have representatives from Coillte here. Since there's no other business, the meeting is now adjourned.